Men think about sex every 7 seconds. Ever heard that line that men think about sex every 7 seconds? If that were true, guys would never finish a single thought. No one could drive, work, or even order a sandwich without their brains short-circuiting every few moments. But somehow, this fake statistic survived for decades, passed around like it was scientific fact. The funny part, no one actually knows where it came from. There's no study, no data, no neuroscientist who ever said it. It just appeared, and everyone nodded like, yeah, that sounds about right. The myth suggests men are biologically wired to think about sex nonstop, like some kind of uncontrollable instinct. It paints men as simple creatures driven entirely by hormones. You'll even hear it used as a punchline in movies or locker room jokes. Well, what do you expect? He's a guy. But this idea is less science and more social storytelling. It's a way people have explained gender behavior for centuries, with stereotypes instead of research. So what's the truth? When researchers finally tested this myth, the results were almost boringly normal. In 2011, an Ohio State University study asked college students to record every time they thought about food, sleep, and sex in a week. The average man thought about sex 19 times per day, not once every 7 seconds. Women thought about it 10 times per day. In other words, both groups thought about it regularly, just like any other pleasant thing: eating, napping, daydreaming. That's not obsession, that's being human. So why did the every 7 seconds idea stick so hard? Because it feels true in a world that constantly tells men their worth comes from sexual success. For generations, media, religion, and culture built the same narrative. Men are driven by desire, women are the gatekeepers, and that's just nature. It's simple, catchy, and kind of excuses bad behavior. The myth gave people a lazy explanation for why men cheat, flirt, or make bad decisions. He can't help it. But that's not how brains or biology work. The truth is, men aren't mindless victims of hormones, and women aren't passive saints of restraint. Everyone's brain is wired for reward and curiosity, and sex just happens to trigger those systems. It's not a gender thing, it's a human thing. Thinking about sex sometimes doesn't make you obsessed or abnormal. It makes you alive. What this myth really does is make people feel broken for being normal. Men who don't constantly think about sex might feel off, like something's wrong with them. Women might feel like they're too much if they think about it often. Both sides end up quietly confused by expectations that were never real to begin with. So no, men don't think about sex every 7 seconds. They think about it sometimes, the same way you might think about coffee, music, or a beach vacation when your brain drifts. The number doesn't define anyone's masculinity or worth. The truth is simpler, healthier, and way more human. We all have minds that wander, just not on a timer. The hymen breaks during first sex. There's this old, stubborn idea that a girl's first sexual experience is supposed to break something, that thin piece of tissue called the hymen. Movies, books, and awkward health classes have repeated it so many times that people assume it's some kind of biological seal that proves virginity. You know the story. If there's blood, it means she was a virgin. If there's not, people start whispering. It's one of the most damaging sex myths out there, and it's based on pure misunderstanding of anatomy. Here's what's actually true. The hymen doesn't break. It doesn't pop like bubble wrap or tear like paper. It's a stretchy ring of tissue that sits just inside the vaginal opening, more like a scrunchie than a wall. Some people are born with a large one, some have just a small ridge, and some don't have much hymenal tissue at all. It's about as unique as fingerprints. For many, it naturally stretches or thins out over time, from sports, dancing, bike rides, tampons, or even just existing. It's not a barrier waiting for a specific moment. So where did this breaking idea even come from? It goes way back, centuries before people understood anatomy properly. In older societies, women's bodies were tied to honor, family reputation, and marriage value. The proof of virginity, a bleeding sheet or a painful first night, was used as evidence of purity. If there wasn't blood, it was seen as shameful. The problem? The hymen doesn't work that way. Studies show that many first sexual experiences cause no bleeding or pain at all. Others bleed slightly, not because something broke, but because of tension, dryness, or lack of comfort. Even doctors used to misunderstand it. For decades, medical textbooks described the hymen like a seal that opens during first intercourse. But when forensic experts started examining it closely, they realized something strange. They couldn't reliably tell if someone had ever had sex by looking at it. In fact, many sexual assault survivors have completely intact hymens, and many people who've never had intercourse have hymens that look torn. It's that unreliable. So why do people still believe this myth? Because it gives society a physical way to police sexuality, especially women's. It lets people pretend purity is something that can be proven. That kind of thinking sticks around because it gives control and fuels judgment. It's easier to look for a physical sign than to accept that virginity is a social idea, not a biological event. The sad part is, this myth still hurts real people. It makes young girls terrified of their first time, expecting pain and bleeding as proof of something. It pressures men to expect that proof too, and both walk away feeling confused or guilty when biology doesn't perform like a script. It also keeps harmful virginity tests alive in some countries. Painful, unnecessary, and completely unscientific procedures. Here's the real story. Your hymen doesn't measure your worth, your purity, or your experience. It's just a normal, variable part of anatomy, one that most people never even notice. Nothing breaks when you start having sex. What actually changes is understanding, trust, and connection. And those things have nothing to do with a thin piece of tissue.
Bigger genital size equals better performance. Somewhere along the line, people started treating size like a scoreboard, as if good sex could be measured with a ruler. You see it in jokes, locker room talk, and entire marketing industries that prey on insecurity. Bigger is better, they say, as if everyone's body is a one-size-fits-all puzzle. But here's the truth. Great sex isn't a geometry problem, and satisfaction has very little to do with size. The myth comes from a mix of pop culture exaggeration and old social conditioning. Movies, porn, and music videos have built this cartoonish image of what real men look like below the belt, and what women are supposed to want. It's dramatic, visual, and sells fantasy. When that fantasy gets repeated enough, people start believing that size automatically equals skill, confidence, or masculinity. But when researchers actually asked real people what mattered, the results told a completely different story. In one large study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine, women ranked emotional intimacy, communication, foreplay, and a sense of connection far above size when describing satisfaction. In other words, how someone makes you feel matters way more than what they're working with. Another review of over 50 studies found no consistent correlation between penis size and sexual pleasure. Some even reported discomfort when size was above average. The body is built for compatibility, not extremes. So why does this myth refuse to die? Because it feeds into deeper insecurities for both men and women. Men are told that their worth is tied to dominance and performance, so anything that suggests small feels like failure. Women are told that bigger must mean more passion or power, even though many find that unrealistic and uncomfortable. It's not really about biology. It's about ego, fear, and a world that constantly compares bodies. What's rarely talked about is that sexual satisfaction is mostly psychological. The brain, not the body, is the largest sex organ. Confidence, communication, emotional safety, and curiosity all amplify pleasure in ways size never can. You could have perfect anatomy and still leave your partner cold if there's no connection or empathy. On the flip side, an average body paired with attention, communication, and care can create experiences that are off the charts. This myth also causes quiet damage. It makes men anxious, overcompensating, or avoiding intimacy altogether out of fear of not measuring up. It makes women feel pressured to pretend that size determines pleasure, or to internalize that something must be wrong with them if they don't react the way movies show. Both sides end up missing out on honest, joyful experiences because they're too busy performing an illusion. The truth is, there's no universal ideal size, only compatible people and open communication. What actually makes sex good isn't anatomy, it's adaptability. Listening, learning what works for your partner, and being willing to adjust. Those are the real skills.
Women can't get pregnant during menstruation. Here's one of those myths that sounds logical, and that's exactly why it fools so many people. A lot of people think if she's on her period, pregnancy's impossible, right? It feels safe, it feels scientific, and it feels like nature's built-in protection. But biology doesn't run on a calendar app, and menstrual cycles aren't as predictable as we like to believe. The truth is, while the chances are lower, pregnancy during a period is absolutely possible. Let's break down why. The typical menstrual cycle lasts about 28 days, with ovulation, the release of an egg, usually happening around day 14. But typical is a word that rarely fits real life. Many people have shorter cycles, longer cycles, irregular cycles, or shifts caused by stress, diet, sleep, or even travel. In someone with a short cycle, ovulation can happen right after their period ends, sometimes within just a few days. Now here's the twist. Sperm can survive inside the body for up to 5 days. That means if you have sex toward the end of your period, those little swimmers could still be hanging around when ovulation hits. And when sperm meets egg, it doesn't care if the calendar says period week. Timing is everything, and it doesn't always sync up neatly. Studies have even found that in rare cases, some people ovulate early or unpredictably, sometimes during light bleeding that's mistaken for a period. It's not common, but it's far from impossible. So where did this myth come from? Mostly from confusion mixed with wishful thinking. Decades ago, before people could easily track cycles or understand hormonal patterns, period sex was seen as a natural contraceptive. It became folk wisdom, something mothers and friends passed down as safe. Add to that the fact that most sex education skips over fertility windows, and you end up with a whole generation believing the period is a biological shield. Another reason it stuck is comfort. The idea that there's a predictable, safe week is easier to live with than a messy truth that cycles can shift. People like certainty, and myths often fill in the gaps that science can't simplify neatly. The real-world problem? Misinformation like this leads to unplanned pregnancies and unnecessary anxiety. People who rely on this myth as natural birth control often find themselves shocked weeks later when that impossible pregnancy test turns positive. It also causes confusion in relationships when partners blame each other or think something unusual happened, when in reality, biology just did its unpredictable thing. The better takeaway is this: the body doesn't read calendars. Fertility is a sliding scale, not an on-off switch. If avoiding pregnancy is important, it's always safer to use reliable contraception, period or no period. And if conception is the goal, knowing how variable ovulation can be actually improves the odds. So, can someone get pregnant during menstruation? Not likely, but yes, absolutely possible. The human body isn't a clock, and that's what makes it fascinating and frustrating at the same time. You can't outsmart biology with wishful thinking. You can only understand it better.
You can't get pregnant the first time you have sex. This is one of those myths that sounds comforting when you're nervous and terrifying once you realize it's wrong. The idea that you can't get pregnant the first time you have sex has been whispered through generations of teenagers, often as reassurance or wishful thinking. It's been passed around locker rooms, classrooms, and awkward late-night conversations for decades. But here's the blunt truth. Your body doesn't care if it's your first time, your 50th, or your wedding night. If the timing is right, meaning sperm meets egg, pregnancy can absolutely happen. The human body doesn't run on experience points. Ovulation doesn't hold off until you've learned the ropes. The first time you have sex, all the biological systems involved, ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, are already fully capable of doing their jobs. When ovulation occurs, an egg is released and waits around for about 12 to 24 hours. Meanwhile, sperm can survive inside the reproductive tract for up to 5 days. So if sex happens within that window, fertilization can occur. Whether it's your first time or your 100th makes zero difference to your biology. So where did this myth come from? Like most bad information, it probably started with a mix of fear and denial. Talking about sex, especially with teenagers, has always made people uncomfortable. Instead of honest conversations about risk and protection, adults used scare tactics or simplifications. Somewhere along the way, someone decided that telling young people you can't get pregnant the first time might calm anxiety or make sex seem less intimidating. Unfortunately, it did the opposite. It made people careless. There's also a strange psychological angle. People often assume that something so major, like creating a life, shouldn't happen during something that feels new, clumsy, or awkward. It doesn't feel important enough to cause real consequences. But biology doesn't wait for emotional readiness or skill. Fertility isn't sentimental, it's mechanical. Even more dangerous is that this myth downplays the need for contraception and education. Many people, especially teens, skip protection during their first sexual experience because they believe this lie. That's why a significant number of unplanned pregnancies come from first-time encounters. It's not because first-time sex is especially risky, it's because people think it isn't.
There's also another layer of shame and silence that keeps this myth alive. In many cultures, talking about contraception before first sex is seen as planning sin, so people avoid it altogether. Instead, myths fill the space where information should be. And when those myths fall apart, people are left scared, guilty, or completely unprepared for the consequences. Here's the truth. The first time you have sex, the odds of pregnancy are exactly the same as any other time, assuming ovulation and sperm overlap. Experience doesn't make you immune, and ignorance doesn't protect you. It's not about morality or luck. It's just basic biology doing what it's meant to do. So if anyone ever says, "Don't worry, it's your first time," remember, nature doesn't keep score. Fertility doesn't care if you're a beginner. The only thing that matters is whether protection was used and timing aligned. That's the unglamorous, unfiltered truth, but it's also the one that keeps you safe.
Pulling out always prevents pregnancy. Don't worry, I'll pull out. Those 5 words have been whispered in countless bedrooms like some kind of magical safety spell, as if timing alone could defy biology. The pull-out method, or withdrawal, has been used for centuries, and honestly, it sounds simple enough. Just stop before you finish, right? But the truth is, your body isn't built with a pause button, and sperm doesn't wait politely for instructions. Despite what a lot of people hope, pulling out isn't the reliable birth control trick it's made out to be. Let's start with science. Before ejaculation, the penis releases a small amount of fluid called pre-ejaculate, or pre-cum. It's basically a natural lubricant produced by the Copper's glands, and it can contain sperm. Not always, but often enough to cause pregnancy. Studies have found that even when a man pulls out every single time with perfect control, which is rare, about 4 out of 100 couples still end up pregnant within a year. But here's the catch. Most people don't do it perfectly every time. In real life, with distractions, heat of the moment mistakes, and timing errors, the failure rate jumps to around 22 out of 100 couples per year. That's almost a 1 in 4 chance. Not great odds for something advertised as safe enough. The reason this myth survives is because of 2 things: ego and denial. For one, it does work sometimes. When people pull out successfully and nothing happens, it feels like proof that the method works. But that's survivor bias. You only hear from the ones who got lucky, not the ones who ended up shocked weeks later. The second reason is that people want to believe they're in control. It feels powerful to think you can outsmart biology with reflexes and trust. But the human body, especially during sex, isn't built for split-second precision. There's also the emotional side. A lot of people rely on pulling out because they're too embarrassed to buy condoms, too shy to talk about contraception, or afraid their partner will take it as an insult. It becomes the compromise, a quiet, risky middle ground. But that silence can come with huge consequences. Pulling out might lower risk compared to doing nothing, but it's not a substitute for protection. It also does nothing against sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. So, while some couples use it as backup in long-term relationships where both are tested and aware, relying on it casually or repeatedly is like trying to catch a bullet with your bare hands. Technically possible, but not something you want to bet on. Here's another overlooked truth. When accidents happen, people often blame themselves, thinking they messed up.
But the method itself is flawed by design. It depends on perfect timing, constant control, and trust in body signals that are unreliable in the heat of the moment. It's not about intelligence or maturity. It's just bad odds. So if anyone ever says, "Don't worry, I'll pull out," know that what they really mean is, "Let's take a 1 in 4 gamble." It might sound convenient, but convenience isn't protection. Biology doesn't care about timing, only about opportunity. And pre-cum is one tiny drop of opportunity that's ruined a lot of plans. Morning after pills cause abortion. Somewhere along the way, emergency contraception got tangled up in moral panic and misinformation. People started saying the morning after pill was the same thing as an abortion pill, that it ends a pregnancy. You've probably heard it thrown around in arguments, news debates, or whispered with guilt in pharmacy aisles. But here's the thing, that's not how it works at all. The morning after pill doesn't end a pregnancy, it prevents one from starting in the first place. Let's break this down clearly. The morning after pill, brands like Plan B or Post-Anor, works by delaying ovulation, meaning it stops the ovary from releasing an egg. If there's no egg, there's nothing for sperm to fertilize. It's like stopping the race before it even begins. It doesn't affect an existing embryo, it doesn't harm a fertilized egg, and it doesn't disrupt implantation. In fact, if someone is already pregnant, meaning the egg has implanted in the uterus, the pill does absolutely nothing. It's not an abortion pill, it's a prevention pill. The confusion started decades ago when people mixed up emergency contraception with medication abortion, like mifepristone or misoprostol. Those are completely different drugs with completely different purposes. But because they all relate to reproduction and timing, misinformation spread fast, often fueled by religious or political agendas. In many communities, the morning after pill was painted as something immoral, and pharmacies even refused to stock it. Ironically, the people spreading that message were often the same ones encouraging personal responsibility. What's wild is how quickly this myth still spreads today. Many people, even adults, think taking Plan B means you did something wrong. In reality, it's a safety net. Birth control can fail, condoms can break, or sometimes people just make mistakes. The morning after pill is one of the simplest, most effective backup options available. And it's not new. Scientists developed the concept in the 1960s. Modern versions can reduce the risk of pregnancy by about 75 to 90% when taken within 3 days after unprotected sex, and even up to 5 days for some types. The sooner the better, because its only job is to stop ovulation before sperm gets the chance to meet an egg. But here's the deeper reason people still believe the abortion myth: shame. Talking about emergency contraception still carries a stigma, especially for women. It's seen as evidence of bad choices, instead of what it actually is, a responsible, time-sensitive medical decision. Because society links women's reproductive control with morality, myths like this one are convenient tools for judgment. They turn science into social pressure. There's also a surprising psychological factor: the word after. Morning after pill sounds like something reactive or destructive, not preventative. That phrasing alone blurs the line in people's minds. But if we were renamed last chance contraception, fewer people would mistake it for abortion. Here's the truth that deserves to be louder. The morning after pill doesn't end pregnancies. It prevents them. It doesn't cause harm. It gives choice. It's one of the safest and most empowering forms of backup protection available. And the only reason it's controversial is because myths about it are louder than facts. So no, the morning after pill doesn't cause abortion. It stops ovulation, not life. When it really ends is panic, and that's something science should never have to apologize for. Men have higher sex drives by default. It's one of those facts people repeat without ever questioning. Men are just hornier by nature. You'll hear it said casually, at parties, in sitcoms, even in classrooms. Men think about sex all the time. Women just aren't built that way. It sounds scientific, but it's really more stereotypical than biology. For decades, this myth has shaped how we see desire, how couples communicate, and even how science itself studies sexuality. But when researchers actually dug into the evidence, they found something fascinating. Sex drive isn't about gender. It's about opportunity, expectation, and environment. Yes, testosterone does play a role in sexual desire for everyone. Men generally have more of it, and it does influence libido. But that's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Plenty of women with average hormone levels have strong, frequent sexual desire. And plenty of men with normal testosterone levels don't think about sex much at all. In other words, hormones open the door. They don't decide who walks through it. So if it's not purely biology, why do people believe men want it more? Because society built an entire identity around that idea. From a young age, boys are taught that wanting sex is natural, expected, and even part of masculinity. Girls, on the other hand, are often told the opposite, that wanting sex too much makes them easy or unladylike. The result is, men are encouraged to express desire, while women are trained to suppress it. Over time, that becomes cultural reality, not biological truth. A series of studies from the Kinsey Institute and other major research centers have shown this clearly. When you remove social shame and gender expectations, the gap in sex drive nearly disappears. In fact, when researchers studied women in sexually open societies, where female pleasure is normalized, their levels of desire, initiation, and fantasy were almost identical to men's. The difference isn't in hormones, it's in freedom. This myth sticks around because it's convenient. It gives men a free pass for impulsive behavior. He can't help it, he's a guy. And shames women for having normal sexual feelings. She must be desperate. It creates a false hierarchy of desire, one that pressures both sides. Men feel broken if they're not always ready, and women feel defective if they are. It's a lose-lose situation created by generations of misunderstanding. And there's another layer, the way science historically approached sex. For most of history, studies on sexual behavior were written by men, focused on men, and funded by male-dominated institutions. Early research often treated female desire as mysterious or secondary, which reinforced the myth that women just don't want it as much. But more recent neuroscience has shown that women's brains respond to sexual stimuli just as strongly. The difference is how freely they can act on that response. In truth, sex drive is fluid. It changes with mood, stress, relationship quality, and even sleep. Some people, regardless of gender, have naturally higher or lower desires. That's not a gender issue, it's a human one. So no, men aren't automatically wired to want sex more than women. They're just more socially allowed to talk about it, ask for it, and joke about it. The rest of us were taught to stay quiet, and that silence got mistaken for biology. You can get an STI from oral sex.
It's one of those myths people repeat like it's a loophole. It's just oral, it doesn't count. Somehow, oral sex got filed under the category of safe or risk-free, especially among teens and young adults trying to dodge the real risks of sex. But the truth? The mouth might look harmless, but it's a major entry point for infection. You absolutely can get a sexually transmitted infection from oral sex, and plenty of people do. Let's start with the basics. STIs spread through skin-to-skin contact, bodily fluids, or infected tissue, and oral sex involves all three. The mouth and throat have delicate membranes and tiny blood vessels, which make them ideal for microscopic germs to sneak in. Viruses and bacteria don't care whether sex was oral or penetrative. They care about access. That's why infections like herpes, HPV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, and even HIV, in rare cases, can be transmitted through oral contact. Take HPV, for instance. It's the most common STI in the world, and most people who get it don't even realize it. While many cases clear up naturally, certain strains of HPV can cause cancers of the throat and mouth. In fact, HPV-related oral cancers have been rising, particularly among men. The same goes for oral gonorrhea, which often shows no symptoms but can live quietly in the throat and spread through kissing or future partners. Herpes, too, is a big one. Cold sores, or HSV-1, and genital herpes, or HSV-2, are actually the same virus family, and either type can travel in either direction, meaning a harmless cold sore can lead to a lifelong genital infection, and vice versa. So why do people still believe oral sex is safe? A big part of it comes from the way sex education is often watered down or skipped entirely. Many schools still teach abstinence-only programs that don't cover oral or anal sex at all. So people leave thinking, if they did mention it, it must not count. There's also the social side. Oral sex is often seen as less intimate, less serious, or somehow not real sex. That perception makes people careless, even though the biological risk is still there. Another factor is comfort. Condoms and dental dams exist for oral protection, but very few people actually use them. Why? Because they feel awkward, unfamiliar, or unnecessary. Add a dash of embarrassment when talking about it, and you've got the perfect setup for myths to survive. And here's the tricky part. STIs from oral sex often don't cause obvious symptoms. Someone can carry gonorrhea in their throat for months and never know it. By the time they get tested, they've already passed it along. That silent spread is part of why doctors keep pushing for regular STI screenings, even for people who only do oral. The truth isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to clear the fog. Oral sex isn't risk-free. It's just lower risk than some other types of contact. Protection exists, and it works. Using barriers, getting vaccinated for HPV, and getting tested regularly are easy ways to stay safe without the drama. So no, oral sex isn't some magical safe zone. It's still sex. And if it involves skin, fluids, or mouths, it involves risk. The good news is, once you know that, you can actually make choices based on facts instead of myths. And that's a lot sexier than pretending germs don't care about lips. Women climax slower because they're built that way. You've probably heard this one framed as biology. Women just take longer. It's said so casually that it sounds like a fact, like it's written somewhere in the instruction manual of human anatomy. Movies and jokes even play into it, showing women as slow-blooming mysteries and men as quick, unstoppable engines. But the truth isn't about anatomy at all.
Women don't climax slower because they're built that way. They climax slower because of the context they're in. Let's start with science. Physically, the female body is capable of reaching orgasm as quickly as the male body. The clitoris, the organ most directly tied to female pleasure, has over 8,000 nerve endings, twice as many as the penis, and exists purely for sensation. There's no biological reason it should take longer to trigger pleasure. So what's going on? Why do so many women report struggling to reach orgasm or taking longer than their partners? The answer lies less in nerves and more in what's happening above the neck, the brain, emotions, and environment. Orgasm is a neurological event, not just a physical one. It's a complex feedback loop between stimulation, relaxation, and safety. For most women, mental factors like trust, comfort, and focus play a massive role. If you're anxious, self-conscious, or distracted, your body literally can't switch into pleasure mode. Stress hormones block the same pathways that trigger arousal. That's why it's not about taking too long. It's about needing the right conditions to let go. Meanwhile, cultural messages pile on more pressure. For centuries, women were taught that sex was for reproduction, not for pleasure. The idea of women enjoying sex was treated as indulgent or shameful, and those old ideas still echo in modern behavior. Many women grow up without ever being encouraged to explore what feels good to them. Add partners who rush, skip foreplay, or assume penetration is the main event, and you've got the perfect recipe for slow climaxes. It's not nature's fault, it's social conditioning. There's also the issue of focus. Research shows that women are far more likely to reach orgasm when foreplay lasts longer, when there's open communication, and when they feel emotionally connected. That's not about neediness. That's about biology responding to context. The arousal system isn't like a light switch, it's like a dimmer. It needs build-up, both mentally and physically. When that's missing, everything slows down. What's really unfair is how this myth blames women for being complicated. It makes it sound like they're slow, delicate, or difficult to please, when in reality, most of the delay comes from how rushed, distracted, or poorly informed their partners are. Men are taught to focus on performance. Women are taught to be patient. The result? Everyone's misreading each other's bodies. Here's the honest truth. Women aren't built to climax slower, they're often set up to. When you add time, comfort, curiosity, and communication, the supposed gap nearly disappears. In fact, studies show that lesbian couples report the highest rates of mutual satisfaction and orgasm. Not because of orientation, but because of attention, communication, and patience. So no, women aren't biologically slow. They're just expected to reach pleasure in a system designed to ignore how they actually work. When the environment finally matches what their body needs, safety, time, and connection, that so-called delay turns out to be nothing more than a myth society was too impatient to question.
Men can't fake orgasm. If you've ever heard someone say, "At least guys can't fake it," they were absolutely wrong. It's one of those lines people repeat like it's biologically impossible, as if ejaculation and orgasm were one single, guaranteed event. But here's the truth. Men can fake it, and a surprising number have. Studies suggest that up to 1 in 5 men have pretended to climax at least once in their lives. And not because they're bad people or manipulative, but because they're human, dealing with pressure, awkwardness, or exhaustion in a culture that ties their worth to performance. So how does that even happen? Simple. Sex isn't always cinematic. In real life, there's darkness, condoms, noise, and distraction, plenty of ways to make things look convincing. If a man feels like he's taking too long or senses his partner is tired, or just wants to avoid an uncomfortable conversation about why he's not finishing, faking it becomes the easier option. Some have even admitted to doing it out of compassion, not wanting their partner to feel rejected or unsuccessful. The deeper reason, though, is psychological. Men are taught from a young age that good sex equals orgasm, and that not finishing means failure. That's a heavy burden to carry. For women, there's at least social awareness that faking happens, not that it's good, but it's understood. For men, it's invisible. If they can't finish because they're stressed, anxious, tired, or struggling with medication side effects, they often feel embarrassed or broken. So instead of admitting it, they fake it, because sometimes pretending feels safer than explaining. There's also the cultural script to blame. In movies and porn, male climax is treated like the grand finale. It's how you know the scene is done. That message seeps into real life, making it seem like the goal of every encounter is his orgasm. So when it doesn't happen, it feels like a glitch in the system. Faking it becomes a way to reset that narrative, to prove he's normal, even when his body's just having an off night. But here's where it gets interesting. Biologically, orgasm and ejaculation are not the same thing. They usually happen together, but they're controlled by different parts of the nervous system. Men can experience orgasm without ejaculation, and they can ejaculate without actually feeling orgasmic. The body's signals aren't always synchronized, especially under stress, alcohol, or anxiety. That's why the idea that men can't fake it makes no sense. There's nothing magical preventing it. There's just a social blind spot that assumes they wouldn't. The real problem isn't the faking, it's the silence behind it. When men can't talk about sexual frustration or emotional fatigue, they start pretending to protect their image. But pretending always builds distance. Partners end up confused, thinking everything's fine, while both people walk away unsatisfied or disconnected. The fix isn't to call men out for faking. It's to stop pretending sex has to end with some perfect synchronized explosion every time. Desire and pleasure are messy, and that's okay. So yes, men can fake orgasm, not because they're deceitful, but because they feel pressure to perform instead of connect. Maybe if we all stopped treating sex like a scoreboard, there'd be no reason for anyone, man or woman, to fake anything at all. Tightness means inexperience. This one might be one of the most quietly harmful sex myths out there. The idea that tightness in someone's body equals innocence, purity, or lack of experience. You've probably heard people say things like, "She was tight, so she must be new to it," or "The first time is always tighter." It's a myth that's been passed down for generations, built on a mix of bad anatomy, ego, and centuries of cultural conditioning. But here's the truth. Tightness isn't proof of anything. It doesn't tell you who someone is, what they've done, or how many partners they've had. It's just muscle, and muscles vary from person to person, moment to moment. Let's start with a little anatomy check. The vagina isn't a rigid tube that stretches permanently after sex. It's an elastic muscle system, more like a balloon than a tunnel. It expands when aroused, contracts when not, and adapts to what's happening. That means tightness depends on things like arousal, comfort, relaxation, and even anxiety. If someone's nervous or uncomfortable, the pelvic floor muscles automatically tense up. It's a protective reflex, not a sign of newness. In fact, the tighter someone is during sex, the more likely it means they're scared, unaroused, or uncomfortable, not pure. There's even a medical term for when those muscles clamp involuntarily, vaginismus. It's a condition where penetration becomes painful or impossible because the body's instinctively guarding itself. And here's the kicker. It can happen to anyone, regardless of experience level. Someone who's never had sex, someone who's been married for years, or someone recovering from trauma can all experience it. So, when people use tightness as a compliment or proof of virginity, they're actually romanticizing tension and discomfort. So where did this idea even come from? Like most purity myths, it traces back to control. For centuries, societies have treated women's bodies as symbols of honor, property, or family reputation. Virginity was currency, and tightness was treated as a physical receipt. That's where phrases like untouched or pure come from, a way of reducing a person to muscle tone. It's a myth that allows people to judge and control, disguised as biology. And the damage doesn't stop there. This belief teaches men that their worth as lovers depends on how tight someone feels, turning pleasure into performance. It teaches women that if they're not tight enough, something's wrong with them. Both sides end up trapped. Insecurity in one and pain in the other. It's a myth that kills curiosity, communication, and comfort, the three things that actually make sex good. What's far more accurate and healthy is understanding that tight and loose aren't measures of experience, they're reflections of comfort. When someone feels safe, relaxed, and aroused, their body naturally opens up. That's not loss, that's biology working properly. The more turned on someone is, the more their body prepares to make things easier and more enjoyable. That's how it's supposed to work. So no, tightness doesn't mean inexperience, and looseness doesn't mean promiscuity. The body isn't a moral scorecard. It's adaptable, intelligent, and designed for comfort when treated with patience. If there's one takeaway, it's this. Tight isn't the goal. Comfort is. Sex isn't supposed to be about testing, proving, or earning anything. It's supposed to be about trust and connection. And trust doesn't make you tighter. It makes you real. Semen boosts mood due to hormones. Every so often, a headline or viral post claims something wild like "Science proves semen is an antidepressant." You've probably seen it, usually shared half jokingly, half seriously. The idea is that because semen contains hormones and chemicals like serotonin and oxytocin, it somehow acts as a biological mood booster for whoever receives it. It's catchy, controversial, and a little too convenient. But when you actually look at the research, that claim falls apart fast. So where did this myth even start? It traces back to a small, widely misinterpreted study from the early 2000s. Researchers at SUNY Albany surveyed college women and found that those who had unprotected sex reported slightly lower levels of depression than those who used condoms. The authors speculated that semen's chemical makeup, which includes mood-related compounds like endorphins, cortisol, and testosterone, might have an antidepressant effect when absorbed through the vaginal lining. The media ran with it like gospel. Unprotected sex makes women happier. What got buried in fine print was the small sample size, lack of control for relationship quality, and the huge elephant in the room. Correlation doesn't mean causation. Here's what's actually going on. There's no solid scientific evidence that semen itself chemically improves mood. Most follow-up research found that emotional factors like relationship satisfaction, trust, and connection explain the difference far better. People in loving, stable relationships tend to be happier, have more unprotected sex because they're comfortable, and thus report better moods. The semen isn't the cause. The closeness is. In other words, it's not what's in the semen that matters. It's the context. Hormones like oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, are released during touch, sex, and orgasm in general, regardless of condom use. You don't need unprotected intercourse to trigger that chemical rush. You just need intimacy. So why does this myth still float around? Partly because it sounds scientific enough to be believable, and partly because it's been twisted into clickbait or even manipulation. Some people, often men, use it as a way to justify skipping condoms. It's healthier for you if I don't wear one. That's not science. That's salesmanship. And it's dangerous. Condoms prevent infections and unplanned pregnancies, things that definitely ruin moods. There is also the placebo factor. If someone believes that something makes them feel good, they might genuinely experience a mild mood lift. The brain's expectation can trigger its own reward chemicals, kind of like how people swear by Lucky Charms or energy crystals. That doesn't mean the object itself has special power. It means the belief does. What's most telling is that no reputable large-scale study has ever confirmed any consistent mental health benefit from semen exposure. Not one. It's just another myth that took a piece of real science, sex can make you feel good, and twisted it into pseudoscience. Semen makes you happy. Here's the real truth. Good sex can absolutely improve your mood, but that's because of connection, endorphins, and human closeness, not because of a chemical cocktail in someone else's body fluid. The magic ingredient isn't in the semen. It's in feeling safe, wanted, and emotionally seen. So the next time someone quotes that study, remember, pleasure isn't a chemical donation from someone else's body. It's a shared experience, one your own brain already knows how to create. Myth number 2. Masturbation causes acne, hair loss, or weakness. If myths had a hall of fame, this one would have its own golden plaque. For centuries, people have been told that masturbation causes everything from acne and baldness to blindness and insanity. Generations of teenagers grow up terrified that their secret habit would ruin their health, a fear so strong it shaped entire moral codes and medical books. But the reality is masturbation doesn't cause acne. It doesn't make you weak, bald, or crazy. It's just one of the most persistent moral panics in human history, born not from science, but from shame. This myth didn't start in a lab. It started in 18th century Europe, a time when religion and medicine were deeply intertwined. A Swiss doctor named Samuel Tissot published a book in 1760 claiming that masturbation drained the body's vital energy and caused every disease under the sun. He blamed it for poor eyesight, depression, hair loss, and weakness. The problem? His theory had zero evidence. He based it entirely on his moral views and a handful of case stories that fit his assumptions. But the idea spread like wildfire because it gave parents, teachers, and priests a new way to control behavior. Soon, the self-abuse panic was everywhere. Doctors warned that touching yourself could lead to madness. Schools installed spiked wristbands or sheets designed to prevent temptation. Even cereal brands like Kellogg's and graham crackers were originally invented to reduce sexual urges. Plain food for pure thoughts. It sounds absurd now, but back then it was considered science. People genuinely believed the body had a limited supply of energy and that sexual release, especially alone, wasted it. Fast forward to today, and echoes of that fear still linger. Some people still claim masturbation causes acne or muscle weakness. The acne rumor likely stuck because hormones like testosterone and dopamine spike during arousal. And since those same hormones play a role in skin oil production, people assumed there was a direct link. But dermatologists have confirmed for decades that masturbation has no measurable effect on acne. The same goes for hair loss. It's caused by genetics and hormones like DHT, not your sex life. As for weakness, that's just old-fashioned guilt. Masturbation can cause temporary fatigue, sure, the same kind you'd feel after a workout or release of endorphins, but it doesn't deplete your strength, nutrients, or lifespan. In fact, studies showed that regular self-pleasure can reduce stress, improve sleep, and even boost immunity. It's a completely normal part of human sexuality across all cultures, ages, and genders. The real harm comes not from the act itself, but from the shame surrounding it. When people grow up believing something natural is dirty or damaging, it creates guilt that can last for years. It leads to anxiety, secrecy, and even physical tension, the very problems the myth pretended to prevent. So no, masturbation doesn't cause acne, baldness, or weakness. What it did cause was centuries of unnecessary guilt and a lot of bad cereal. The human body isn't that fragile, and pleasure isn't a sin that drains your soul. It's a biological function, as normal as sneezing or stretching. If anything, the only thing masturbation can really take away from you is shame. And that's something most people could use a little less of. You can't get pregnant in water. There's a strange kind of comfort in this myth, as if water has magical anti-baby powers. You've probably heard it whispered at pool parties, joked about in locker rooms, or even seen it played off in movies. Don't worry, it's fine if it's in the shower or a hot tub. The water kills the sperm. It sounds scientific enough to believe. After all, sperm are fragile, right? But the truth is far less glamorous. Water doesn't kill sperm instantly, and pregnancy can happen if the right conditions line up. It's rare, but not impossible. Here's what's really going on. When people say sex in water, they usually mean intercourse that happens while submerged, not sperm floating through the pool on their own. That part really is impossible. If sperm are released into open water, like a bathtub, pool, or ocean, they die within seconds because water, chlorine, and temperature changes destroy their environment.
They can't swim through a body of water, find their way into someone's body, and cause pregnancy. So in that sense, no, sperm won't survive in the water, waiting to ambush anyone. But here's where the myth gets tricky. If intercourse happens in the water, meaning sperm are ejaculated directly inside the vagina or close enough for contact, the presence of water doesn't magically protect against pregnancy. Inside the body, sperm are still in their natural environment. The water outside doesn't reach in and kill them. They can still travel through cervical mucus and potentially fertilize an egg if ovulation is near. So while having sex in a pool or hot tub might feel safe, it's not birth control. In fact, it can make things a little riskier for other reasons. Water, especially chlorinated or hot water, can wash away natural lubrication, making friction worse and increasing the risk of small tears or irritation. That's not just uncomfortable, it can make it easier for infections or STIs to spread. Condoms can also slip or tear more easily in water, especially with oils, lotions, or hot tub chemicals involved. So why do people still believe this myth? Probably because it sounds clean and logical. Water kills sperm feels like a tidy scientific statement, and we all want to believe that nature provides an easy shortcut. But the fragility of sperm doesn't mean hopeless. Inside the body, sperm are survivors, tough enough to live up to 5 days waiting for an egg. This myth also survives because it lets people justify risky choices. Sex in water feels spontaneous and harmless, like nature's own cover story. But biology doesn't take vacations, even in a hot tub. Pregnancy may be less likely, but the chance never drops to zero. Here's the bottom line. Water can wash away a lot of things, but not risk. You can't drown biology in a pool. Sperm die quickly outside the body. But if sex happens and sperm make it inside, water doesn't make a difference. So if someone tells you that you can't get pregnant in the water, tell them they're half right. Sperm can't swim across a pool, but they can still swim where it matters. Nature doesn't care if you're underwater. Birth control makes you infertile. Few myths cause as much quiet anxiety as this one. You'll hear it whispered in doctors' offices, on TikTok health videos, or from well-meaning relatives. Be careful with birth control, it'll mess up your body, or it can make you infertile later. For many people, it's the fear behind every pill packet. The idea that preventing pregnancy now somehow means you'll never be able to have kids later. But here's the truth. Birth control doesn't cause infertility. It temporarily pauses your reproductive cycle. And once you stop, your body goes right back to doing what it's designed to do. Let's start with what birth control actually does. Whether it's the pill, patch, injection, implant, or hormonal IUD, all modern contraceptives work by regulating hormones, usually by suppressing ovulation, thickening cervical mucus, or thinning the uterine lining. In simple terms, they tell your body now is not the time. But the moment you stop taking them, your natural hormone rhythm restarts. Some people start ovulating again within a couple of weeks. For others, it takes a month or two. Either way, fertility comes back. So where did this myth come from? Part of it comes from confusion between temporary delay and permanent damage. When someone goes off birth control and doesn't get pregnant right away, it's easy to assume the method ruins something. In reality, it's just biology recalibrating. After months or years of hormonal regulation, your body needs a short adjustment period. kind of like rebooting your computer after a long update. For example, the birth control shot, Depo-Provera, is known to take the longest for fertility to return, sometimes up to 10 months after the last injection. But even then, that's just a delay, not damage. Every major medical organization, including the WHO, CDC, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, agrees that hormonal birth control has no long-term effect on fertility. What's even more interesting is that many people who blame birth control for infertility are actually running into unrelated issues that were just hidden while on it. Conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome, thyroid disorders, or irregular ovulation can affect fertility, and the pill often masks those symptoms by making cycles appear normal. When you stop, the underlying condition reveals itself, making it look like the pill caused the problem when it really just paused the signs. There's also a cultural element to this myth. For generations, society has used fear to control women's reproductive choices. Telling women that birth control breaks their bodies discourages them from using it, even when it's one of the safest, most studied medications in the world. That fear works better than any law at keeping people uncertain, hesitant, and dependent on luck instead of knowledge. And let's not forget the irony. Birth control can actually protect fertility in some cases. By regulating hormones and preventing ovarian cysts, endometriosis flare-ups, or uterine growths, it can preserve reproductive health for later. The infertility label couldn't be further from the truth. Here's the bottom line. Birth control doesn't make you infertile. Once you stop, your body simply resumes its natural rhythm. And if you're ovulating and healthy, pregnancy can happen just as easily as before. So if you ever worried that the pill, patch, or IUD might ruin your chances someday, take a breath. Birth control doesn't take away your ability to have kids. It gives you control over when you want to. That's not infertility. That's freedom. Double condoms are safer. It sounds logical at first, doesn't it? 2 layers of protection should be better than 1. That's how we treat everything else in life. 2 locks on the door, 2 helmets on a bike, 2 firewalls on a computer. So why not 2 condoms? It feels like the ultimate better safe than sorry move. But in reality, double layering condoms doesn't double protection. It actually makes things worse. Instead of creating a safety net, it creates friction, tension, and a higher chance of breakage. In short, 2 condoms are less safe than 1. Let's break down why. Condoms are designed with precision. The material, usually latex, polyurethane, or polyisoprene, has just the right thickness and flexibility to stretch without tearing. When 2 are used together, say one male condom over another, or a male and female condom at the same time, the friction between them increases dramatically. They rub, snag, and roll against each other with every movement. That friction weakens the latex, causing micro tears you can't see. The result? The exact opposite of what you wanted, a higher chance of slippage or bursting. This myth has been around for decades, passed around as a life hack or extra safety tip. Some people believe it because it sounds like common sense. If one barrier works, 2 must be better. Others pick it up from panic or fear, especially when talking about high-risk situations. But condom design doesn't work like stacking armor. It's more like wearing 2 pairs of gloves coated in oil. They slide and stretch against each other until one rips. The double-up idea likely comes from misunderstanding how condoms are tested. Every condom that hits the market goes through extreme durability checks, pressure, elasticity, and brake tests under lab conditions. They're built to withstand stress far beyond what happens during sex. Adding another condom doesn't increase that strength. It just disrupts the design. It's like putting two tires on the same rim. They'll grind and blow out faster, not last longer. So what is the correct way to be extra safe? Use one condom correctly every time. Check the expiration date, store them in a cool, dry place, not in your wallet or car, open them gently, and use plenty of water-based or silicone-based lubricant. Lube is what actually reduces friction and prevents breakage, the exact opposite of what doubling up does. And if you're using another form of contraception, like the pill, implant, or IUD, pairing that with one condom gives you the best of both worlds, protection from both pregnancy and STIs without added risk. It's also worth noting that using a male condom and a female condom together is just as bad of an idea. They're not meant to overlap. They'll stick, twist, and tear. The correct method is one or the other, not both. So why do people keep spreading this myth? Because fear makes us overcompensate. Sex education often focuses so much on danger that people assume more must equal safer. But like most myths, it's born of good intentions and bad information. Here's the truth. When it comes to condoms, one is plenty. Two just make friction, and friction is the enemy of protection. If you really want to be safer, don't stack, just be smart. Use one correctly, add lube, and remember that safety comes from knowledge, not doubling up. So next time someone says, let's use two just to be sure, tell them the real science. Trust the one that's built for the job. It's thinner, stronger, and way less likely to end in an awkward trip to the pharmacy.
Sex burns hundreds of calories. It's one of those myths that refuses to die, probably because it flatters everyone involved. You've heard it before. Who needs the gym when you can just have sex? Or, it's basically a workout. Movies and pop culture love to frame sex as an athletic, sweaty, calorie-torching event, a combination of cardio, strength training, and passion. It's fun to believe, sure, but scientifically, not so much. In reality, the average sex session burns about as many calories as climbing a single flight of stairs. Sexy, maybe, but not exactly CrossFit. Let's start with the numbers. Researchers at the University of Montreal actually decided to test this myth back in 2013. They fitted couples with fitness trackers and asked them to record their energy expenditure during sex. The results were surprisingly average. Men burned about 100 calories in 25 minutes, and women about 70. For comparison, that's roughly the same as a brisk walk or folding laundry while dancing a little. In contrast, jogging for that same amount of time burns over 250 calories. So where did the hundreds of calories idea come from? Mostly from exaggeration and wishful thinking. Early estimates were based on assumptions rather than real data. Someone guessed, someone repeated it, and it spread. Magazines and tabloids ran with it, turning sex into a kind of fun fitness narrative. After all, it's a lot more exciting to say sex equals 400 calories than to admit sex is kind of like taking the stairs twice. That said, not all sex is created equal. The energy you burn depends on how long it lasts, how intense it is, and what you're doing. Positions that involve more movement, lifting, or full-body engagement obviously burn more than lying still. But even the most vigorous sessions rarely break 200 calories, unless you're reenacting an action movie. It's more about rhythm than reps. But here's the interesting part. While sex doesn't burn a ton of calories, it does come with legitimate health benefits that have nothing to do with fitness. Regular sex can lower stress, improve sleep, and release endorphins that boost mood and immunity.
It raises heart rate briefly, releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and can even help with mild pain relief. So while it's not going to replace your morning jog, it might replace your anxiety medication for a minute. The problem with this myth isn't that it's harmless fun, it's that it sets unrealistic expectations. It makes people think sex should feel like a full-body workout, or that if you're not panting and drenched in sweat, you didn't do it right. That pressure takes away from what sex actually is, an emotional, sensory experience, not a calorie challenge. And it works both ways. Some people use this myth as motivation, like, hey, at least I'm staying fit, or others use it as an excuse to skip the gym because I'm burning calories elsewhere. Either way, it overhypes the physical side and misses the deeper point. Sex isn't about exercise, it's about connection, pleasure, and communication. So no, sex won't give you abs or replace your treadmill. It won't burn off that pizza and it won't sculpt your core. But it will make you feel closer, calmer, and maybe a little more alive. Which, when you think about it, is worth more than calories anyway. Sperm die as soon as they hit air. This one sounds like science, sharp, confident, and absolute. Don't worry, sperm die the moment they hit air. It's the kind of statement people throw around to calm nerves after a scare, as if oxygen is some kind of instant sperm killer. And while there's some truth to it, it's not the whole story. Sperm don't drop dead the second they're exposed to the world. They're fragile, yes, but they're also stubborn survivors when the conditions are right. Let's break it down. Sperm are living cells, and like any living cell, they need a specific environment to stay alive. Inside the human body, they're in a perfect habitat, warm, moist, and protected by cervical mucus. But once outside, their lifespan depends entirely on what they land on and how quickly they dry out. If semen dries, say on skin, fabric, or a surface, the sperm dies within minutes. Air exposure itself doesn't kill them, dehydration does. When the seminal fluid dries, it removes the moisture that keeps the sperm swimming. Once they're dry, they're done. However, if semen stays wet, like in a warm, moist environment, sperm can survive for several hours, on rare occasions even longer. That's why doctors use fresh sperm samples for fertility treatments. They can remain viable outside the body for a short time, as long as the fluid doesn't dry out and the temperature doesn't drop. But outside a medical setting, that survival window is small. Now here's where this myth gets messy. Some people use it to dismiss the possibility of pregnancy after sexual activity that didn't involve penetration, like semen on fingers or near the vaginal opening. While the risk is low, it's not always zero. If there's fresh semen and it makes contact with the vulva shortly after ejaculation, there's a slim chance sperm could survive long enough to find their way in. It's unlikely, but not impossible. That's why sperm die as soon as they hit air isn't a reliable rule for birth control. Biology is unpredictable, and tiny windows of viability can surprise people. So why does this myth persist? Because it's comforting. It gives people a sense of control after moments of panic. When you're anxious about potential pregnancy or a close call, the idea that sperm are fragile little quitters is reassuring. And while that's mostly true, simplifying it to instant death makes people underestimate how long they can really hang around in the right conditions. The truth is, sperm are simultaneously delicate and determined. Outside the body, they die fast, especially once semen dries. Inside, or in fluid that's still wet and warm, they can live up to 5 days in the reproductive tract. That's why people can get pregnant even if sex happens days before ovulation. Sperm are patient little marathon runners waiting for their moment. So, yes, if semen's on a dry towel or your bedsheet, you can relax. Those sperm are toast. But if it's fresh, wet, and anywhere near where it could matter, the situation gets trickier. It's not likely, but biology doesn't deal in absolutes. Here's the real takeaway. Sperm don't die the second they hit air, but they don't last long either. They're fragile swimmers, not zombies. The safest approach isn't relying on air exposure, is using protection and understanding how your body works. Because while oxygen can dry them out, overconfidence is what really kills your peace of mind. Men stop producing sperm at a certain age. For some reason, we've all been taught that fertility is mainly a woman's ticking clock, that men, unlike women, have endless time. Yet at the same time, there's this opposite myth floating around, that at a certain age, men just stop producing sperm altogether, like a factory that shuts down for good. Neither version is true. The reality sits somewhere in between. Men don't stop making sperm, but their sperm changes over time. It becomes fewer, slower, and less reliable as the years go on. Here's what's really happening. Unlike women, who were born with a fixed number of eggs that gradually run out, men make new sperm constantly. The process, called spermatogenesis, happens in the testes and takes about 64 days from start to finish. As long as a man has functioning testicular tissue and healthy hormone levels, that process never truly ends. Men in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s have fathered children. Biologically, the machinery stays on. But, and this is the part people tend to ignore, just because the factory's open doesn't mean the product stays the same. Around the mid-40s, sperm quality starts to decline. The number of sperm decreases, their movement slows, and their DNA becomes more prone to errors. Think of it like a printer that still works, but starts jamming more often. Testosterone levels also dip gradually, which can affect libido and sperm production rates. None of this means total infertility, but it does make conception take longer and carry slightly higher risks for the baby. Studies have shown that children born to older fathers have a higher likelihood of genetic mutations, not because of bad parenting, but because sperm DNA gets more unstable with age. The risk of certain developmental disorders like autism or schizophrenia increases slightly in babies born to men over 45. Again, slightly is key. It's not a guarantee, just a statistical bump. Still, it's proof that male fertility isn't immune to time. So why do people believe the myth that men run out of sperm? Probably because of how we mirror women's fertility narrative. Society tends to explain reproduction in simplified, gendered terms. Women run out, men keep going. It's easy to flip that script when people start noticing that older men have lower energy, decreased sex drive, or erectile issues, and mistake those things for infertility. In reality, those symptoms come from hormonal changes, not a complete stop in sperm production. On the flip side, the myth that men stay completely fertile forever is just as misleading. Yes, they can produce sperm for life, but the success rate drops with age. It can take longer to conceive, and the odds of healthy sperm decline each decade. That's why fertility specialists now encourage men, not just women, to think about age when planning families. So no,
Sperm production doesn't shut off like a light switch. The body keeps making them for life, but quality, quantity, and reliability slowly fade. Think of it like an engine that still runs, but doesn't rev like it used to. The takeaway? Men have biological clocks too. They just tick more quietly. Fertility may last a lifetime, but time still leaves fingerprints. If anything, that should be empowering, not scary, knowing that care, health, and timing matter on both sides of the equation. Because reproduction isn't about who runs out first. It's about understanding how both systems age together. All fantasies reflect hidden desires. Here's a thought that's made a lot of people uncomfortable. The idea that whatever turns you on in your imagination must secretly reveal who you really are. You dream about something unusual, and suddenly you wonder, wait, does this mean I want to do that in real life? Psychologists, moralists, and even pop culture have been guilty of pushing this myth, that sexual fantasy equals confession. But here's the truth. Fantasy isn't a diary of secret wishes. It's a sandbox for the mind, a place to play, test, and feel without consequence. Fantasies are more like daydreams than desires. Your brain uses them the way a writer uses a notebook to explore emotions, ideas, and what-ifs in a safe, private space. They can be shaped by curiosity, fear, boredom, or even randomness. Some people fantasize about things they'd never actually want to happen. Others imagine scenarios that contradict their real-world values. It's not hypocrisy, it's psychology. Fantasy is imagination wearing a costume, not a confession slip. For example, research has found that many people, especially women, report fantasies about dominance, submission, or situations that sound taboo. But when asked whether they actually want those experiences in real life, most say no. The fantasy works because it feels emotionally intense, not because it's a literal goal. It triggers adrenaline, vulnerability, or a feeling of surrender, sensations that the brain processes as exciting, not necessarily moral or practical. That's why so many fantasies lose all their power once spoken out loud. They were never meant to be real, just mental theater. So why do we confuse the two, fantasy and intention? Because we've been taught to moralize imagination. Society treats sexual thoughts like evidence instead of expression. When you're raised in a culture that links desire to guilt, every fantasy feels like a secret you have to explain away. Freud didn't help much either. His theories made everyone think their dreams and fantasies were clues to hidden trauma or repressed urges. Modern psychology, however, has moved far beyond that. The consensus now is clear. Thoughts and actions aren't the same thing. You can imagine something without wanting it, just like you can dream about falling without wanting to hit the ground. There's also something comforting about the myth. It makes the world seem predictable. If fantasies always revealed true motives, then we could read people's minds, decode their morality, and understand their behavior. But humans are way messier than that. Sometimes your brain just likes stimulation, novelty, or a mental movie that stirs emotions you don't get in daily life. It's less about wanting and more about feeling. The danger of this myth is how much shame it creates. People judge themselves harshly for thoughts that never leave their heads. They confuse curiosity with corruption. And shame, ironically, makes those fantasies stronger because the forbidden always feels more powerful. Accepting that imagination doesn't define morality helps break that cycle. Here's the real takeaway. Fantasy is emotional language, not a to-do list. It's how the brain experiments safely, processes desire, or rewrites tension into excitement. You don't need to analyze or fear it. You just need to understand that your thoughts are allowed to be weird, complex, and sometimes contradictory. Fantasies don't reveal your true self. They reveal that you have a self, curious, creative, and alive enough to imagine. Only men are visual. You've heard this one everywhere, from dating advice blogs to stand-up comedy routines. Men are visual, women are emotional. It's one of the most stubborn stereotypes about human sexuality. And it's used to explain everything, from how people flirt to how they cheat. The story goes like this. Men are wired to respond to what they see, while women supposedly need romance, connection, and words to get aroused. But here's what science says. That's not actually true. Women are just as visual as men. They have just been taught not to show it. Let's start with the research. When scientists actually measured physical arousal in labs, not through surveys, but with real physiological responses, something fascinating happened. Men and women's bodies reacted almost identically to erotic images and videos. Blood flow, pupil dilation, and heart rate all spiked. The main difference wasn't in the body's reaction. It was in how people reported feeling. Men said, "Yeah, that turned me on." Women often said, "Not really." Yet their physical responses told a different story. In other words, their brains and bodies were saying yes, while social conditioning told them to say no. This is where culture comes in. For centuries, women were told that sexual interest was something to hide. A good woman didn't stare, didn't fantasize, and didn't admit attraction. Men, on the other hand, were encouraged, even praised for being visual. Entire industries were built around that double standard. From advertising to movies, everything catered to the idea that the male gaze defines desire, while women are its object. When you grow up in that system, it's no surprise that men get labeled as visual creatures and women as emotional ones. The difference isn't biology, it's permission. Even the language we use reinforces the myth. Men are called visual thinkers, hunters, or stimulus-driven. Women are called intuitive, nurturing, or responsive. That framing makes it sound like women can only feel arousal once someone else starts the story. But anyone who's ever met a woman knows that's nonsense. Studies in recent years, including those by Meredith Chivers and other sex researchers, have confirmed that women respond physically to erotic sexual cues, even across a wider range of scenarios than men. The difference is that women often filter those reactions through social expectations. They're thinking, "What does it say about me if I admit that?" The problem is that this myth doesn't just misrepresent desire, it limits it. It makes men feel one-dimensional, like their sexuality is purely instinctual, and it teaches women to doubt their own attraction. That creates imbalance. Men might feel pressured to always act visually turned on, while women learn to suppress or second-guess what excites them. Over time, that kind of repression doesn't just affect sex. It affects confidence, curiosity, and communication. Here's the truth. Everyone is visual. Attraction begins in the brain, not the gender. Both men and women respond to what they see. faces, gestures, confidence, context, but culture filters those reactions differently. When women are allowed to explore visual stimulation without shame, the gap disappears entirely. So no, men do not have a monopoly on the visual side of desire. Women have simply been taught to close their eyes. The body never forgot how to look. It just learned to pretend.
Sexual attraction fades naturally in long relationships. People love to say this one like it's an unchangeable law of nature. After a while, the spark just fades. It's treated almost like gravity, unavoidable, inevitable, and irreversible. You'll hear it from friends, sitcoms, even therapists sometimes. The passion burns hot in the beginning, then dies out as comfort takes over. But that's only half true. Sexual attraction doesn't fade naturally. It changes shape. What was once fueled by novelty and adrenaline often evolves into something deeper, calmer, and more enduring. The chemistry doesn't die, it matures. Here's what's happening behind the scenes. When you first fall for someone, your brain turns into a fireworks factory. Dopamine floods your system, the same reward chemical released when you win a game or eat your favorite food. Everything about your partner feels new, electric, and addictive. That can't keep your hands off each other phase is real, and it's driven by novelty, the thrill of discovery. But the brain can't stay in that state forever. After a while, dopamine levels stabilize, and another hormone steps in, oxytocin, often called the bonding chemical. Oxytocin is what makes you feel calm, safe, and deeply connected. It's less fireworks, more candlelight. That shift isn't a loss, it's an evolution. Your body literally transitions from high-voltage desire to comfortable attachment. The mistake people make is assuming that comfort means boredom. In reality, long-term attraction thrives on familiarity when it's paired with curiosity. It's not that partners stop wanting each other, it's that they stop noticing each other. When everything feels predictable, the dopamine engine quiets down. But the solution isn't to chase new people. It's to chase new experiences together. Researchers have actually studied couples who managed to keep their attraction strong for decades. The secret isn't luck or magic. It's intentional novelty. They travel, try new things, or change routines that jolt the brain back into curiosity mode. Anything that reintroduces a bit of uncertainty, even something as small as a new restaurant or activity, sparks the same reward system that early romance triggers. Desire, it turns out, feeds on discovery, not necessarily on strangers. Another big reason this myth persists is the unrealistic way we portray love. Movies and media show endless passion, no awkward phases, and no emotional maintenance. When real life doesn't match that, people assume something's broken. But long-term desire isn't supposed to be constant. It's cyclical. It ebbs and flows with stress, health, routine, and communication. The problem isn't that attraction fades. It's that we stop nurturing it when it changes form. And then there's the deeper truth. Sexual desire and emotional safety are sometimes opposites. The part of your brain that craves adventure and danger isn't the same part that loves comfort and predictability. Balancing both requires work and communication.
When couples stop talking about what turns them on, stop flirting, or stop seeing each other as individuals instead of extensions of the relationship, desire gets smothered under routine, not biology. So no, attraction doesn't just fade naturally. It transforms from dopamine-driven excitement to oxytocin-based connection. One is fireworks, the other is a campfire. The first burns bright, the second keeps you warm. If you stop feeding the flame, of course it dims. But with care, curiosity, and humor, that spark can last a lifetime. The real secret isn't fighting change, it's embracing it. Because the kind of attraction that survives time isn't weaker, it's wiser.
Watching adult content kills intimacy. This one's a modern myth, whispered in couples therapy sessions, splashed across relationship blogs, and argued endlessly online. Watching adult content destroys intimacy. It's often framed as a moral warning, the idea that porn rewires your brain, numbs your emotions, and replaces real connection with fantasy. It's a fear that makes sense on the surface, especially in a world where screens compete with skin. But the truth isn't that simple. Watching adult content doesn't automatically kill intimacy. It all depends on context, communication, and honesty. Let's start with what the research actually says. Studies on pornography and relationships have found wildly mixed results because not everyone uses it the same way. For some people, it can absolutely create distance. If one partner hides it, uses it compulsively, or substitutes it for real intimacy, it can become a wedge, not because of the content itself, but because of the secrecy. It's the same dynamic as emotional cheating. The damage comes from the deception, not the activity. When one person feels excluded, betrayed, or compared to unrealistic images, resentment builds. That's not about porn, that's about trust. But here's the flip side that rarely makes headlines. When adult content is used openly and with mutual understanding, it can actually increase connection. Some couples watch it together, not to replace intimacy, but to explore it. It can spark conversations about desires, fantasies, and boundaries that would otherwise stay hidden. One 2017 study found that couples who used adult content jointly reported higher levels of sexual openness and satisfaction than those who didn't. When both people feel safe discussing it, porn becomes a tool, not a threat. So why does the porn kills love myth stick so tightly? Because it touches two of our biggest fears, being replaced and being inadequate. Media depictions of porn addiction or real cases where secrecy spirals out of control make people believe it's universally toxic. And in some cases, yes, overuse can desensitize arousal or warp expectations, especially when someone uses it to escape stress or avoid emotional closeness. But that's not unique to porn. People can do that with video games, work, or even fitness. The problem isn't the habit, it's how it's used to avoid intimacy instead of building it. Another layer is emotional history. For decades, porn was portrayed as shameful or dirty, especially for women. That stigma lingers, so when people discover a partner watches it, it triggers old cultural scripts about betrayal or not being enough. But intimacy isn't built on purity. It's built on honesty.
Being able to talk about what turns you on, what doesn't, and what feels comfortable is what keeps relationships strong. The healthiest relationships don't outlaw fantasy, they make space for it. What kills intimacy isn't a laptop screen, it's silence. When people can't talk about their sexual habits without fear of judgment, they retreat into secrecy. That's where trust erodes. So no, adult content doesn't automatically kill intimacy. It can if it replaces communication or becomes a coping mechanism for distance. But in a trusting, curious relationship, it can also be neutral or even helpful. Here's the bottom line. Porn isn't the enemy of love. Disconnection is. If couples treat it like a taboo, it becomes one. If they treat it like a conversation, it becomes just another part of being human. Cheating always means dissatisfaction. It's one of the most painful assumptions in any relationship that if someone cheats, it must mean they weren't happy, that there was something missing, something broken, something you didn't give them. It feels like the only logical explanation for betrayal. But the truth is far messier and, strangely, more human. Cheating doesn't always come from unhappiness. Sometimes it comes from curiosity, opportunity, insecurity, or even the desire to feel alive again. It's not always about the partner left behind. Sometimes it's about the person doing the betraying, trying to fill a hole inside themselves. Let's start with what the research says. When psychologists study infidelity, they find that emotional dissatisfaction is one cause, but far from the only one. A large study by the Kinsey Institute found that many people who cheat describe their relationships as loving, stable, and satisfying. They didn't stray because they wanted out. They strayed because they wanted something more, or something different. Novelty, attention, and ego play huge roles. The thrill of being desired by someone new can activate powerful reward circuits in the brain, the same dopamine rush that fuels new love. It's not about love fading. It's about people chasing that high again. This doesn't excuse the behavior. It just explains it. Cheating can be an act of selfishness, not always sorrow. Some people cheat because they're afraid of aging or losing their desirability. Others do it because they crave risk, excitement, or validation. For some, it's about control, the secret power of having something forbidden. These motives are emotional, not relational. They come from the self, not the situation. That's why you can have a seemingly perfect couple on the outside, great sex, deep friendship, shared laughter, and still one person crosses that line. It's not always a reflection of what was missing between them, but what was missing within one of them. Cultural myths make this hard to accept. We love neat narratives. If someone cheats, someone else must have failed. That's easier to process than humans are complicated and flawed. It's why movies and advice columns reduce affairs to morality tales, villains and victims. But real life doesn't fit into that box. Sometimes people cheat because they panic at the comfort of commitment. Sometimes they're terrified of routine. Sometimes they love their partner deeply, but can't resist the pull of novelty, only to realize afterward that it didn't fix anything. The irony is that many people who cheat feel intense guilt afterward, not because they were caught, but because they realize they weren't even running from their partner. They were running from themselves. The affair wasn't about finding a new love. It was about trying to feel something that had gone numb. None of this makes infidelity okay.
It still hurts. It still shatters trust. But understanding that it doesn't always stem from dissatisfaction can help people heal differently. It means the betrayed partner isn't automatically not enough. It means relationships can, in some cases, recover if both people are honest about what actually went wrong. So no, cheating doesn't always mean someone was unhappy. Sometimes it means they were impulsive, insecure, or lost in their own head. The hardest truth is also the most freeing one. Infidelity isn't always about the person you hurt. Sometimes it's about the part of yourself you couldn't face. Sexual orientation can be changed with therapy. For decades, countless people were told something cruel, that who they love, who they're attracted to, or who they are could be fixed. The idea sounded clinical, compassionate even, when dressed up in medical jargon. We can help you change. But underneath that false promise was emotional abuse disguised as treatment. This myth that sexual orientation can be changed through therapy is one of the most damaging lies ever sold under the label of psychology. And the truth is simple. You can't cure who someone loves because it's not a disease. Let's get one fact straight right away. Every major medical and psychological organization on Earth, from the American Psychological Association, APA, to the World Health Organization, WHO, has condemned so-called conversion therapy. Not only does it not work, but it actively causes harm. Decades of research have shown that attempts to change sexual orientation lead to depression, anxiety, self-hatred, and suicidal thoughts. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association officially removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders. That was over 50 years ago, and yet this myth refuses to die. The persistence of the idea comes down to stigma, not science. For much of history, same-sex attraction was criminalized or pathologized, labeled as sin, sickness, or perversion. When the medical field caught up to reality, some groups refused to accept it. Religious leaders and pseudo-therapists began marketing reparative therapy, premising to turn gay people straight or suppress attraction through prayer, shame, or behavioral conditioning. Victims were told to imagine disgust, recite scripture, or endure aversive stimuli whenever they felt attraction. It wasn't therapy. It was psychological torture. The most tragic part, many who went through conversion programs truly wanted to change, not because they hated themselves, but because society made them believe they had to. These programs fed off pain, guilt, and the human need to belong. Survivors often describe leaving with lifelong trauma, haunted by the belief that they were broken for failing to become something they were never meant to be. That's why major health organizations now classify conversion therapy as a form of psychological abuse, especially for minors. So what does real science say about sexual orientation? That it's complex, fluid for some, and deeply ingrained for others. It's shaped by a mix of biological, genetic, and environmental factors, none of which can be reprogrammed through therapy. It's not a behavior that can be unlearned because it's not a behavior at all. It's part of identity. Just like you can't talk someone out of being left-handed or change their natural eye color, you can't straighten someone's orientation. You can only suppress it. And suppression isn't healing, it's harm. Thankfully, the tide is turning. Dozens of countries and U.S. states have banned conversion therapy, recognizing it as dangerous pseudoscience. Survivors have spoken out, researchers have debunked its claims, and more therapists are focusing on affirmation therapy, helping people accept themselves, not fight themselves. The truth is simple but powerful. Therapy should never try to erase who you are. It should help you live it safely and proudly. Love doesn't need correcting, and the only thing that ever needed curing was the myth that it did.
Men are naturally polygamous. Women are monogamous. It's one of those ideas that people repeat like it's carved in stone somewhere in evolution's rulebook. Men are wired to spread their seed. Women are wired to settle down. It sounds scientific. It's often delivered with smug certainty, and it's been used to justify everything from cheating to double standards. But when you strip away the outdated biology talk and moral spin, the truth is far more complex and a lot more equal. Both men and women have flexible mating instincts. Sometimes they seek variety, sometimes they seek stability. It all depends on context, opportunity, and emotion, not chromosomes. The myth comes from a misreading of evolutionary biology. Early theories assumed that because sperm are cheap and eggs are expensive, men evolved to pursue quantity, many partners, while women pursued quality, one stable mate. On paper, it makes sense. More partners equals more potential offspring for men. But real life isn't a lab equation. Modern anthropology, psychology, and neuroscience have all shown that human relationships are far more adaptable than that model suggests. Let's look at the evidence. Across cultures, both sexes show variability in mating behavior. In societies with strong gender equality and economic independence, women are just as likely as men to pursue multiple partners. And not because of corruption or Western influence, but because the social costs are lower. When women have control over their resources and safety, they act on the same desires men have always been free to express. In contrast, in environments where survival depends on partnership or protection, both sexes tend toward monogamy because stability benefits them both. Evolution isn't prescribing morality, it's adapting behavior to circumstance. Even our closest animal relatives show this flexibility. Bonobos, for instance, are famously promiscuous across sexes, using sex for bonding and peacekeeping. Meanwhile, some bird species form lifelong pair bonds. And yes, males cheat there too, but so do females. Nature doesn't divide the world into horny males and faithful females. It divides it into strategies. Humans just happen to have the cognitive complexity to choose which one fits their moment. What keeps this myth alive, though, isn't science, it's culture. For centuries, patriarchal societies framed male promiscuity as natural and female sexuality as dangerous. Men who strayed were acting on instinct. Women who did the same were immoral. That double standard became so normalized that even science in the 19th and 20th centuries absorbed it. Early researchers collected data that confirmed what they expected to find. Men want sex, women want security. But as research diversified, those conclusions started to fall apart. Modern studies reveal that sexual variety appeals to both genders. Both men and women experience boredom in long-term relationships. Both respond to novelty, attention, and opportunity. The difference lies in how they're socialized to talk about it. Men are encouraged to brag about conquests. Women are taught to downplay them. So we mistake silence for purity and openness for biology. At the end of the day, humans are omnivorous lovers, capable of pair bonding and exploration, loyalty and curiosity. Biology gives us the tools for both. Society decides which one we glorify. So no, men aren't born to wander, and women aren't born to wait. We're all just navigating the same messy mix of desire, connection, and circumstance, using instincts that evolved for survival, not for morality. The only thing truly natural is flexibility. Everything else is just a story we tell to excuse our choices.
Sex addiction is not a moral flaw. When people hear the phrase sex addiction, it usually sparks eye rolls, judgment, or jokes. It's often treated like an excuse, a label people use when they get caught cheating, lying, or spiraling out of control. Oh, sure, someone might say, you're not unfaithful, you're addicted. For decades, society has framed sex addiction as a lack of discipline or morality, a character defect dressed up as a diagnosis. But neuroscience paints a very different picture. Sex addiction isn't about sin or weakness, it's about compulsion. The same brain mechanism that drives substance abuse, gambling, or any other reward-seeking behavior. Let's start with what's actually happening in the brain. All addictions, whether to drugs, alcohol, or behavior, share one thing: a hijacking of the brain's reward system. This system relies on dopamine, the feel-good chemical that reinforces pleasurable experiences. Normally, dopamine teaches us what to repeat: eating, bonding, achieving goals. But in addiction, the system gets overloaded. The brain learns to chase the dopamine spike, even when the behavior starts causing harm. In sex addiction, that rush doesn't come from the act itself as much as from the anticipation, the fantasy, the hunt, the secret buildup. It's not about pleasure anymore, it's about escape. That's why calling it a moral failure misses the point. People struggling with compulsive sexual behavior often feel deep shame and confusion. They're not chasing joy, they're chasing relief from stress, loneliness, trauma, or depression. Sex becomes a coping mechanism, a temporary fix for pain that never lasts. And because shame is tied to it, the secrecy only feeds the cycle. The more they hide it, the worse the spiral gets. That pattern mirrors what we see in substance abuse. Tolerance, meaning more to feel the same. Withdrawal, cravings and agitation when abstaining. And negative consequences, relationships, jobs, self-esteem falling apart. It's also worth noting that the term sex addiction isn't officially recognized in every diagnostic manual. Some experts call it compulsive sexual behavior disorder, CSBD, instead, a behavioral addiction, not a moral one. The World Health Organization added it to the ICD-11 in 2018, recognizing it as a legitimate mental health issue. That decision was based on years of brain imaging studies, showing that people with compulsive sexual behavior activate the same neural pathways as drug addicts. Their brains light up in the same regions: the reward center, the impulse control system, the stress circuits, confirming what many clinicians already knew. This isn't about bad choices, it's about dysregulation. Still, the myth persists because sex carries moral baggage that other addictions don't. Society is more comfortable forgiving drug addiction than sexual compulsion because sex touches on taboo, shame, and identity. It's easier to label someone dirty than to admit they're struggling. That stigma pushes people away from treatment, leaving them to battle it alone, often in silence.
Recovery from sex addiction isn't about erasing desire, it's about understanding it. Therapy for compulsive sexual behavior focuses on rewiring reward pathways, building coping skills, and separating healthy sexuality from escapism. Many people who seek help aren't immoral, they're exhausted, anxious, and desperate to stop hurting themselves or others. So no, sex addiction is not a moral flaw. It's a behavioral disorder rooted in the same neurological processes that drive other addictions. What looks like lust out of control is often pain in disguise, pain that found an easy button in the brain's reward system. If there's any moral lesson here, it's not about judgment, it's about compassion. Because behind every addicted label is a person who doesn't need punishment. They need help finding their way back to balance, and maybe to forgiveness, too.
Women are less visual because of evolution. This myth has been repeated so many times it sounds like common sense. Men are visual, women are emotional. Supposedly, evolution hardwired men to respond to what they see, bodies, shapes, movement, while women evolved to value emotional depth and social connection over visuals. It's the kind of pop science logic that feels neat and tidy. But reality, it's not that simple and definitely not that gendered. Modern neuroscience has shown that women's brains light up just as much as men's when exposed to visual sexual cues. The difference isn't biology, it's social training and repression. Let's start with what science actually says. In brain imaging studies using fMRI machines, researchers show men and women erotic images or videos while monitoring activity in the reward and arousal centers. The results are strikingly similar. Both sexes show activation in regions like the amygdala, hypothalamus, and ventral striatum, areas tied to desire and pleasure. Women's bodies and brains respond to visual stimuli at almost the same intensity as men's, sometimes even more. But when researchers ask participants afterward how turned on they felt, women report lower arousal. In other words, their bodies are saying yes, but their words are saying no. That mismatch isn't a glitch in the data, it's a reflection of cultural conditioning. For centuries, women have been told not to look, not to stare, not to want, not to show lust. Men's desire has been normalized, celebrated even, while women's desire has been policed. A man gazing at someone attractive is just being a guy. A woman doing the same is often labeled inappropriate, thirsty, or desperate. So women learn to internalize that shame and downplay their own reactions. When society tells you your gaze is dangerous, you learn to look away, even from yourself. The myth also gets fuel from outdated evolutionary psychology. The old argument went like this. Men evolved to be visual because their reproductive success depended on recognizing youth and fertility, physical cues of a healthy mate. Women, on the other hand, needed to select partners who could provide stability and protection. So they evolved to value emotional intelligence and resource potential over looks. It sounds logical, but modern cross-cultural data doesn't support such rigid gender divisions. When researchers account for culture, access, and social freedom, women's visual preferences become just as strong as men's. In societies where women have more equality, they're just as likely as men to prioritize physical attraction. Evolution didn't make women less visual. Patriarchy just told them to pretend they were. Even the idea of visual versus emotional desire is misleading.
Attraction isn't a single-lane road. It's a network of senses and emotions that overlap. Women respond visually, mentally, emotionally, and physiologically all at once. They're not less visual. They're just more socially complex in how they express it. Here's what this myth really does. It silences women's pleasure and excuses men's. It tells one half of humanity that theirs is instinct and the other half that theirs is deviance. It's a convenient story, but not a truthful one. So, no, women aren't less visual because of evolution. Their brains, their eyes, and their biology are just as responsive. The only thing that's ever been different is permission. Desire isn't gendered, it's human. It just looks freer when the world allows you to look back.
Jealousy is proof of love. You've heard it in movies, in songs, even in everyday relationships. If they're jealous, it means they care. It sounds romantic, right? Like jealousy is some kind of emotional receipt, proof that someone's feelings are real. But the truth is, jealousy isn't a measure of love. It's a survival response, a cocktail of fear, insecurity, and instinct designed to protect bonds, not deepen them. Love may inspire tenderness and connection, but jealousy? It's about threat management. It's your brain saying something precious might be taken from me. Let's start with biology. Long before love poems and dating apps, humans evolved to form pair bonds, not just for emotional comfort, but for survival. Early humans relied on their partners for food, safety, and raising offspring. Losing that bond to a rival could mean losing protection or resources, so our brains developed jealousy as a built-in alarm system, a way to detect threats to the relationship. Men and women might feel jealousy differently. Studies show men react more to sexual betrayal, women more to emotional betrayal. But the core function is the same, keeping an attachment secure. It's not romance, it's evolutionary defense. But here's where things get messy. In modern relationships, that same ancient system still fires, even though we're no longer competing for food or survival. A flirty text, a long stare, or even an ex's name can trigger the same primal panic. The brain floods with cortisol and adrenaline, fight or flight chemicals, and suddenly logic shuts down. You're not calmly assessing the situation. You're trying to protect your emotional territory. It feels like love because it's intense, but what you're actually feeling is fear of loss. That's the tricky part. Jealousy mimics passion. It makes people feel alive, alert, emotionally charged. That's why toxic relationships often mistake it for love. When someone says, "I get jealous because I love you so much," what they're often saying is, "I feel scared of losing control." The emotion is real, but the logic is flawed. Love and possession aren't the same thing. Love is about wanting someone's happiness. Jealousy is about fearing their absence. There's also a cultural layer to this myth. Movies and media romanticize jealousy as proof of devotion. The jealous lover fights for their partner, storms in dramatically, proving their affection through confrontation. That kind of narrative normalizes controlling behavior, as if suspicion and obsession are signs of passion. In reality, unchecked jealousy often leads to manipulation, guilt-tripping, or even abuse. It becomes less about connection and more about power. Healthy relationships don't rely on jealousy for validation. They rely on trust, communication, and boundaries. It's normal to feel jealousy. It's part of being human. But what matters is how you respond. Instead of treating it as proof of love, treat it as a signal. What am I afraid of losing? What insecurity is being triggered? Often, jealousy isn't about your partner's behavior. It's about your own self-worth or past experiences. So no, jealousy isn't a love language. It's an emotional smoke alarm. It tells you something's off, but it doesn't tell you how to fix it. The difference between healthy and toxic relationships isn't whether jealousy appears, it's whether you open a conversation or start a fire. Real love isn't about guarding someone like property. It's about trusting them enough to give them freedom and feeling secure enough to know that if they stay, it's by choice, not fear.
Men need to release to stay healthy. This one's practically folklore at this point, passed around locker rooms, whispered during puberty talks, and even thrown around by adults as if it's scientific law. Men need to release regularly or it's unhealthy. The story usually goes that semen builds up like pressure in a boiler, and if you don't let it out, you'll suffer. Maybe from blue balls, maybe from prostate problems, maybe even from bad moods. It's a myth dressed up as medicine. And while, yes, sexual release can feel good and reduce stress, there's no medical requirement for men to ejaculate regularly to stay healthy. Here's what's actually true. The male body constantly produces sperm, millions per day, in fact. It's an ongoing process that doesn't depend on whether ejaculation happens. If sperm aren't released, the body simply reabsorbs them. The cells break down, and their nutrients, proteins, sugars, minerals get recycled. It's an efficient, normal biological process. No swelling, no danger, no toxins building up. Your body doesn't treat sperm like waste. It treats them like renewable material. So where did the men need to release idea come from? Partly from misunderstanding how the reproductive system works, and partly from centuries of moral and cultural anxiety around sex. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Western medicine spread the belief that retained semen caused depression, hysteria, and even madness, especially in men. Doctors at the time thought sexual energy worked like pressure in a pipe. Block it, and something bursts. That myth stuck around, reinforced by the idea that male sexuality is a force that must be expressed or else it'll turn destructive. It's not biology, it's old-fashioned panic in a lab coat. Now that doesn't mean ejaculation has no benefits. Sexual release, through masturbation or intercourse, can relieve stress, release endorphins, and improve sleep. Some studies even suggest regular ejaculation may lower prostate cancer risk, though the evidence isn't conclusive. But that's correlation, not necessity. It's not that you'll get sick if you abstain. It's just that some habits support general well-being. The same way exercise improves health, but skipping a few workouts won't kill you. As for blue balls, yes, that ache is real, but temporary. It's caused by blood flow staying in the pelvic region during arousal without release, creating mild pressure. It's uncomfortable, but harmless, and it goes away on its own. It's not dangerous, and it certainly isn't justification for anyone to feel entitled to sex or pity. The bigger issue behind this myth is how it teaches men to fear their own bodies, to believe they're biologically driven rather than capable of self-control. It turns desire into compulsion and blurs the line between need and want. Real health isn't about constant release. It's about understanding your body's signals without letting them rule you. So no, men don't need to release to stay healthy.
Semen doesn't build up like pressure in a tank, and abstaining doesn't cause physical harm either. The only real harm comes from the myth itself, from teaching boys that their biology controls them instead of the other way around. Sexual release is natural, but so is restraint. What's not natural is guilt, fear, or the belief that your health depends on it. Your body's not a ticking bomb. It's a system that's been evolving for millions of years, and it knows how to handle itself with or without help.
Post-nut clarity means regret. It's become a meme, a punchline, even a half-serious life philosophy, post-nut clarity. The idea that right after orgasm, especially for men, your brain suddenly wakes up. You see the world clearly again, realize your mistakes, and feel instant regret. It's usually framed as funny or tragic, depending on who's telling the story. But here's the truth. That sudden mental shift after sex isn't moral awakening or shame. It's neurochemistry. What people call post-nut clarity is really your brain's way of cooling down from a dopamine high and rebalancing hormones like prolactin and oxytocin. Let's start with what happens during arousal. When you're turned on, your brain floods with dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that fuels motivation, craving, and reward. It's what makes desire feel intense and single-minded. In that state, your logical thinking temporarily takes a back seat. Your brain is focused on one goal: release. You're not supposed to be rational. You're supposed to be driven. That's biology doing its job. Then, once orgasm happens, the brain chemistry flips almost instantly. Dopamine levels crash, prolactin surges, and your nervous system shifts from the go-get-it mode, sympathetic, to the rest and recover mode, parasympathetic. This is the neurological equivalent of slamming the brakes after flooring the gas pedal. Suddenly, the urgency, the fantasy, and the tunnel vision disappear. What replaces them is calm, or for some people, emptiness. That moment of quiet can feel like clarity, but what you're really feeling is chemical contrast. Here's where the confusion comes in. That drop can feel uncomfortable, especially if what just happened doesn't align with your emotions or values. If the sexual encounter was casual, rushed, or emotionally detached, that dopamine crash can look like regret. You might think, why did I do that? But that doesn't mean the act itself was bad. It just means your brain has switched from craving mode to critical mode. In other words, you're not seeing truth after sex. You're seeing things through a calmer filter. This effect isn't unique to men, though. It's more talked about in them. Women experience similar hormonal changes, just less dramatically, because prolactin spikes higher in males after orgasm. That's why men often report feeling sleepy, distant, or detached immediately afterward, while women may stay in a more oxytocin-driven bonding state. It's biology's weird way of balancing reproduction, one body winding down, the other leaning in. The problem with calling it regret is that it moralizes a completely normal brain response. It makes people feel guilty for having desire in the first place, as if wanting something and then feeling neutral afterward is proof of weakness or sin. But it's not. It's the same process that happens after eating a rich meal or buying something impulsively. Dopamine drives you toward the reward and then disappears once you get it. The pleasure fades, leaving reflection in its place. Post-nut clarity isn't your conscience scolding you. It's your nervous system exhaling. Sometimes that brings genuine insight, like realizing a relationship isn't right or a decision was impulsive.
But that's because you're no longer high on hormones, not because sex is shameful. So no, post-nut clarity doesn't equal regret. It's your brain returning to baseline, a chemical cool down after a biological sprint. If it makes you rethink your choices, that's not guilt talking. That's just your brain finally breathing again. Everyone has a fixed libido type. People love putting sex drive into neat little boxes. You're either high libido, low libido, or average. It's treated like a permanent personality trait, like eye color or blood type, something you're born with and can't change. You'll even hear couples say things like, "We're just incompatible. I have a higher sex drive than they do." But the truth is far less rigid. Libido isn't fixed. It's dynamic, constantly shifting with hormones, stress, sleep, diet, emotions, and even your environment. Your desire isn't a number. It's a reflection of what your body and brain are going through. Let's start with biology. Libido, or sexual desire, is influenced by a complex mix of hormones, neurotransmitters, and psychology. Testosterone, estrogen, dopamine, and serotonin all play roles, but they don't work in isolation. They ebb and flow naturally throughout life. Testosterone, for example, peaks in the morning and declines with age, but also fluctuates daily based on diet, activity, and mood. Estrogen rises and falls across menstrual cycles, often increasing desire mid-cycle, then dipping before menstruation. Even cortisol, the stress hormone, can suppress libido when levels stay high for too long. Your brain's reward system can't prioritize pleasure when it's stuck in survival mode. This means that your sex drive can shift week to week or even day to day. One month you might feel insatiable, the next indifferent. It's not a malfunction. It's how the body balances energy and stress. Yet we treat fluctuations like red flags. People panic when their desire drops, assuming something's wrong. In reality, a temporary dip in libido can mean your body's busy doing other things, healing, adapting, protecting, conserving. It's like your brain putting up a "be right back" sign while it handles bigger priorities. Then there's lifestyle. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, alcohol, and certain medications, especially antidepressants, can all dull desire. Exercise, on the other hand, tends to boost libido by improving blood flow and mood. Even your emotional state plays a massive role. Boredom, resentment, anxiety, or unresolved tension with a partner can quietly kill desire faster than hormones ever could. Sexuality doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a mirror for how connected you feel to your body, your partner, and your life. And yet we keep trying to label people by their libido type. The problem with that is it freezes something that's meant to move. It also creates guilt and comparison. Why don't I want it as much as before? Or why am I always the one who wants more? But mismatched desire in a relationship doesn't mean someone's broken. It means both people's rhythms are out of sync. Libido is less like a personality trait and more like the tide, rising and falling with phases, stress levels, and time. The idea of a fixed libido also ignores how context shapes desire. Psychologist Emily Nagoski, in her book Come As You Are, explains that desire is highly responsive. Many people don't feel spontaneous lust out of nowhere. They get turned on by environment, emotional safety, or stimulation. So if you're stressed, distracted, or disconnected, your libido might disappear.
But when you feel rested, secure, or excited, it returns like it never left. That's not inconsistency. That's how desire works. So no, you don't have a fixed libido type. You have a living, breathing system that changes with your body, your mind, and your life. The key isn't trying to set your sex drive to one level. It's learning to listen to it, because libido isn't a label.
You can read desire from facial expressions. It's a myth as old as flirting itself that you can see desire in someone's eyes. Hollywood sells it constantly. The lingering glance, the parted lips, the look that supposedly says yes before anyone speaks. We're told attraction is visible, that you can read someone's interest just by watching their face. But science says otherwise. Humans are actually terrible at reading sexual cues, and we get it wrong about 70% of the time. That stat comes from multiple studies in social psychology showing that people, across genders, are remarkably bad at distinguishing between friendliness and flirtation. When researchers show participants short clips or photos of people displaying neutral, friendly, or romantic expressions, the misinterpretation rate is astonishingly high. Men often mistake friendliness for attraction, while women often underestimate interest. It's not because either gender is worse at reading signals. It's because human emotion isn't as transparent as we think it is. The face doesn't have a universal "I want you" setting. This myth sticks around because it fits the fantasy that chemistry is visible, that one look can say everything. In real life, though, those looks are loaded with ambiguity. The same smile that signals "I'm into you" can also mean "I'm being polite." The same nervous laugh could mean excitement or discomfort. We rely on cultural scripts to fill in the blanks, but those scripts are unreliable and often biased. For instance, research shows men are more likely to interpret neutral or ambiguous signals as sexual interest, a phenomenon called the sexual overperception bias. Evolutionary psychologists theorize this bias developed because the cost of missing a potential mating opportunity was historically higher for men than misjudging interest. But in modern society, it causes obvious problems: unwanted advances, miscommunication, and pressure on women to manage how they appear. On the flip side, women are socialized to suppress overt expressions of interest, which only adds more confusion. Everyone's trying to read signals that half the population has been taught to hide. Even facial microexpressions, those tiny muscle twitches that reveal emotion, don't map neatly onto desire. You can detect anger, sadness, or fear fairly reliably from facial patterns, but sexual interest activates subtle, overlapping cues that are easily masked or mimicked. Add alcohol, nerves, or social pressure, accuracy plummets. That's why consent education keeps emphasizing verbal communication. You can't see a yes. You can't assume attraction from a look, a laugh, or a moment of eye contact. Humans are visual creatures, sure, but desire is layered with context, tone, timing, and mutual engagement. The safest and sexiest move is to ask, not guess. There's also something freeing in letting go of this myth. You don't have to be a mind reader to connect with someone. You don't have to analyze every glance for secret meaning. Attraction doesn't live in micro expressions, it lives in communication.
The people who seem most confident at reading signals are usually just comfortable with uncertainty and willing to clarify instead of assume. So no, you can't reliably read desire from someone's face. You can see interest, curiosity, even warmth, but true desire, that's in words, consent, and context. The eyes might be windows to the soul, but they're terrible lie detectors for lust.
Sex dreams always mean repressed attraction. Few things make people more awkward than waking up from a sex dream about someone unexpected. A friend, a coworker, your boss, or worse, someone you barely like. The first thought that hits is usually panic. Wait, does this mean I secretly want them? But relax, it doesn't. Despite what pop psychology and gossip culture say, sex dreams aren't proof of hidden attraction or secret lust. They're your brain's way of processing emotions, tension, and random data, not sending you a confession note from your subconscious. Here's how it really works. During MRM, the brain is wildly active, almost as much as when you're awake. But the part that handles logic, the prefrontal cortex, goes quiet, while the emotional centers, like the amygdala and limbic system, light up. That means dreams blend emotion, memory, and imagery without rules. Sexual content pops up not because you're repressing something, but because sex is emotionally charged, primal, and deeply symbolic. It's how your brain dramatizes connection, stress, or curiosity, not necessarily desire. For example, dreaming about your boss doesn't mean you want to hook up with them. It might mean you're processing power dynamics, anxiety about approval, or stress about work performance. A dream about a celebrity doesn't mean you're in love. It could represent ambition, admiration, or just mental background noise from what you saw online. Even dreams about exes are rarely about wanting them back. They're often your brain's way of revisiting old emotional patterns or unfinished business. Psychologists have known this for years. Sigmund Freud may have started the myth by claiming that dreams reveal repressed sexual urges, but modern neuroscience tells a different story. Dreams are the mind's nightly housekeeping, a process called memory consolidation. Your brain sorts through the day's experiences, organizing emotional clutter, and testing out what-if scenarios in a consequence-free environment. Sex dreams often happen when your brain's trying to defuse tension, not express attraction. Sometimes they're just random body chemistry. During MRM, blood flow increases throughout the body, including to the genitals, regardless of the dream's content. That's why both men and women experience physiological arousal during sleep, even without erotic thoughts. The brain interprets those sensations and weaves them into the dream storyline, turning a meaningless reflex into a steamy plotline. Your subconscious isn't confessing, it's improvising. So why does this myth stick? Because it flatters the idea that dreams are windows into our true selves. It makes for juicy stories. I dreamt about my friend. I must be in denial. But more often, the meaning is symbolic, emotional, or just nonsense. The brain uses familiar faces to play out unfamiliar feelings, stress, vulnerability, curiosity, or change. If anything, what sex dreams really reveal is how creative your brain is when you're not censoring it. They're emotional theater, not psychological evidence. And interpreting them too literally only makes people anxious about something that's completely normal. So no,
Sex dreams don't expose hidden crushes or forbidden desires. They just show that your brain is busy sorting through feelings, sensations, and memories in the most dramatic way possible. You don't need to decode every character or blush at every scene. Sometimes a dream is just a dream, and your mind is just being weird, beautiful, and human while you sleep. Vaginas need cleaning with products. Walk down the personal care aisle of almost any store, and you'll see a whole shelf devoted to feminine hygiene. Sprays, washes, wipes, perfumes, and powders, promising to make vaginas fresher, cleaner, or more balanced. The marketing is sleek, the packaging is pastel, and the message is clear. Your natural scent needs fixing. But here's the truth that every doctor will tell you straight. Vaginas are self-cleaning. They don't need special soaps, and in fact, those products often do more harm than good. Let's start with biology. The vagina isn't a passive space that collects dirt. It's an active ecosystem. Its walls are lined with mucous membranes that produce natural secretions to flush out bacteria, dead cells, and fluids. Think of it like a self-maintaining filter system. It constantly regulates itself, maintaining the right pH balance, around 3.8 to 4.5, to keep harmful bacteria in check. This slightly acidic environment allows beneficial bacteria, mainly lactobacillus, to thrive. Those bacteria are like tiny bodyguards. They produce lactic acid and hydrogen peroxide, keeping infections and odor-causing microbes out. When people use perfumed soaps, douches, or sprays inside or around the vagina, they throw off that natural balance. Harsh chemicals, alcohol, and fragrances can kill the good bacteria, irritate sensitive tissue, and raise the pH, creating the exact problems those products claim to prevent: itching, discharge, odor, and infections like bacterial vaginosis or yeast overgrowth. It's a classic marketing loop. The product causes the issue, then sells you the cure. So where did the idea come from that vaginas need help staying clean? Like many myths about women's bodies, it's rooted in centuries of shame and control. For most of history, female anatomy was seen as mysterious, dirty, or impure. In the 19th and 20th centuries, companies began exploiting that stigma with feminine hygiene campaigns, suggesting that women needed special products to stay attractive or respectable. They weren't selling cleanliness, they were selling insecurity. And they're still doing it today, just with softer language and pastel packaging. Medically speaking, the only part that ever needs washing is the vulva, the external area, including the labia and clitoris. And even that only requires warm water or mild, unscented soap if desired. The inside, the actual vaginal canal, should be left alone. No douches, no sprays, no refreshing mist. If something smells off or feels uncomfortable, it's not because you didn't wash enough. It's a sign something's disrupting your flora. And that's a job for a doctor, not a bottle of floral-scented foam. There's also an emotional side to this myth. The constant message that vaginas need cleansing or masking teaches people to feel ashamed of their natural scent, something that's as normal and unique as a fingerprint. That shame can quietly erode confidence, sexuality, and body trust. The truth is, a healthy vagina isn't supposed to smell like flowers. It's supposed to smell like you. So no, your vagina doesn't need cleaning products. It already knows how to take care of itself better than any brand ever could. The best way to keep it healthy is simple. Let it breathe, Avoid harsh chemicals, wear breathable fabrics, and trust your body's design. Because the biggest thing that ever needed cleansing wasn't your body, it was the marketing myth that made you doubt it in the first place.
Erectile dysfunction only affects old men. For decades, the phrase erectile dysfunction has been treated like shorthand for aging, a punchline about midlife crises, golf memberships, and gray hair. The assumption is that it only happens to men past their prime, when testosterone fades and blood pressure rises. But the truth is far more common and far less age-bound. 1 in 4 men who experience erectile dysfunction, ED, are under the age of 40. It's not just an old man problem, it's a human one, shaped by stress, habits, mental health, and lifestyle as much as biology. Let's start with the basics. An erection might seem simple, but it's actually a complex coordination between the brain, hormones, nerves, and blood vessels. When one link in that chain falters, physically or mentally, things don't work as planned. In older men, ED is often tied to medical conditions like diabetes, hypertension, or cardiovascular disease, which affect blood flow. But in younger men, the story shifts. The causes are usually psychological or lifestyle related. Stress, anxiety, depression, sleep deprivation, alcohol, smoking, or even excessive porn consumption. Performance anxiety alone can shut down the process entirely. When a man worries about whether he can perform, the brain floods with cortisol, the stress hormone, which constricts blood vessels and overrides the parasympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for relaxation and arousal. Essentially, the brain says, "This feels like danger, not pleasure." The result? Nothing happens. It's not about lack of desire, it's about too much pressure. And that pressure can create a vicious loop. One failed attempt leads to more anxiety, which leads to more failures. Then there's the lifestyle factor. Modern habits quietly sabotage sexual health. Smoking, heavy drinking, and lack of exercise all damage blood vessels, the same vessels responsible for erections. Porn, while not inherently harmful, can also desensitize some men over time, training the brain to expect hyperstimulation that real intimacy can't replicate. Combine that with sleep deprivation, poor diet, and chronic stress, and even a 25-year-old can experience erectile difficulties. Yet the stigma around ED keeps younger men silent. Because it's seen as an old man issue, many feel embarrassed to seek help. They joke it off, avoid relationships, or convince themselves it's temporary. But silence only deepens the shame. The truth is, ED is often a symptom, not a sentence. It's the body's way of saying something's off, physically, mentally, or emotionally. When addressed early, it's almost always reversible. Doctors today treat ED holistically. For some, it's about improving circulation with exercise and diet. For others, it's about therapy, tackling anxiety, self-esteem, or relationship stress. And yes, medications like Viagra or Cialis work, but they're not magic fixes. They're tools to help rebuild confidence while addressing root causes.
The irony is that younger men may actually have the best recovery odds, since their bodies are generally healthier and more responsive to treatment. But that only works if they drop the shame and talk about it. So no, erectile dysfunction isn't just an old man problem. It's a common physiological event that can affect anyone, athlete or accountant, 25 or 65. The difference isn't age, it's honesty. The real danger isn't that young men experience ED. It's that they believe it means something's wrong with their masculinity. In reality, it's just a signal, one that says, take care of your body, calm your mind, and remember that performance isn't the same thing as worth.
You can tell fertility by body shape. This one's been around for centuries. The idea that you can spot fertility just by looking at someone's body. It's baked into pop culture, fashion, and even old-school evolutionary psychology claims that a certain waist-to-hip ratio, breast size, or curvy figure signals peak reproductive health. It's an idea that sounds scientific, but it's really just a myth dressed in biology's clothes. Fertility can't be seen with the naked eye. It's an internal process governed by hormones, not a reflection of body shape, symmetry, or size. The myth likely started from old mating theories that linked visible traits to reproductive advantage. Early researchers claimed that women with an hourglass figure, a waist-to-hip ratio of about 0.7, were universally more attractive because it supposedly indicated youth, hormonal balance, and higher fertility. Men with broad shoulders and lean waists were said to project virility and strength. These ideas became so popular they started sounding like scientific fact. But when modern endocrinology and reproductive medicine tested them, the results didn't hold up. Here's what science actually says. Fertility is about function, not form. It depends on hormonal regulation, ovarian reserve, sperm quality, cycle regularity, and overall health, none of which are visible from the outside. A person with narrow hips can be highly fertile. A person with curves can have hormonal imbalances that make conception difficult. The body's shape is influenced by fat distribution, genetics, diet, and exercise far more than by reproductive capacity. Even the famed 0.7 ratio varies wildly across cultures and time periods, proof that fertility cues are mostly shaped by beauty trends, not biology. In fact, trying to judge fertility by shape is not just wrong, it's dangerous. It feeds body image anxiety, especially for women, implying that their value or reproductive potential is something that can be measured by a mirror. It also ignores medical realities like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, thyroid disorders, and countless other conditions that affect fertility regardless of appearance. Someone can look textbook healthy and still struggle to conceive, while someone else with a completely different body type can get pregnant effortlessly. This myth also reduces attraction to a biology equation, stripping it of emotion, individuality, and personality. Sure, evolutionary theory can explain some preferences, like why we tend to notice youth or vitality, but human relationships are far more nuanced. What people actually find attractive varies wildly across cultures and eras. In some societies, fuller figures were once prized as symbols of fertility. In others, slimness was idealized. Biology didn't change, culture did. When fertility specialists assess someone's reproductive health, they don't measure their hips,
They measure hormone levels, ovulation cycles, and egg or sperm quality. The reproductive system lives beneath the skin, quietly working or struggling regardless of body proportions. So no, you can't tell fertility by body shape. What you're really seeing in someone's build is genetics and lifestyle, not a secret fertility score. The human body isn't a billboard advertising reproductive health. It's a complex system that works best when it's nourished, rested, and respected. And maybe that's the bigger lesson. Fertility isn't beauty, and beauty isn't fertility. One is biological potential, the other is perception. The moment we stop confusing the two, both bodies and science can finally breathe a little easier.
Blue balls are dangerous. It's a phrase that's been thrown around so casually it almost sounds medical. I've got blue balls. It hurts. You don't understand. The myth goes that if someone gets sexually aroused but doesn't finish, the pressure builds up so badly that it can cause real harm or even long-term damage. It's been used for decades as a punchline, a complaint, and, unfortunately, a guilt tactic. But the truth is a lot simpler and a lot less dramatic. Blue balls are uncomfortable, not dangerous. Here's what's actually happening. When someone with testicles gets aroused, blood rushes into the genitals, filling the erectile tissue and causing the swelling that makes an erection possible. The veins that normally drain that blood temporarily constrict, trapping it there to maintain firmness. If arousal continues for a while without orgasm or ejaculation, pressure builds up in the region, not because anything's blocked, but because blood is still circulating faster than it's leaving. That pressure can create a heavy, aching sensation in the lower abdomen or testicles, what people call blue balls. The term comes from the bluish tint the skin can take on due to increased blood flow and oxygen levels. Now, is it painful? Sometimes yes, but only mildly and temporarily. Is it dangerous? Absolutely not. Once arousal fades, the blood flow returns to normal within minutes. The discomfort naturally disappears as the body resets. There's no risk of permanent damage, no pressure buildup, and no medical emergency lurking in your pants. The feeling is your body's way of saying, okay, we geared up, but I guess the show's over. It's biology, not suffering. Doctors actually have a proper name for it: epididymal hypertension. It sounds serious, but it's really just a fancy way of describing temporary congestion in the testicular area. It doesn't require treatment, and it certainly doesn't justify pressuring a partner for sex. That's the dark side of this myth. It's been weaponized. Some people use it to guilt others into sexual activity, as if they're doing them a favor by relieving them. That's emotional manipulation, not biology. No one ever died of blue balls, but plenty of people have been made to feel guilty or coerced because of it. There are easy, harmless ways to relieve the discomfort: a cold shower, light exercise, or just waiting it out. Masturbation can help if it feels right for the person, but it's not required. In every case, the body resolves the issue on its own. The pain may last a few minutes, or at worst, an hour, and it's gone. Interestingly, people with vulvas can experience a similar feeling, sometimes called blue vulva or pelvic congestion. The mechanism is the same. Prolonged arousal without orgasm can create a sense of heaviness or ache in the pelvis. Again, it's harmless and temporary. The real harm isn't in the body, it's in the myth. The idea that someone might be hurt by not climaxing reinforces entitlement and misunderstanding about consent. It turns arousal into urgency and empathy into obligation. In reality, arousal is a reversible process. It might leave you frustrated, but it won't leave you injured. So no, blue balls aren't dangerous.
They're just a brief, annoying reminder that the human body doesn't like being teased for too long. But if your body can handle missed workouts, skipped meals, and sleepless nights, it can definitely handle a little unfulfilled arousal. The pain fades, and so should the myth that someone owes you relief. The clitoris is a small button. For generations, biology books and pop culture treated the clitoris like a tiny mystery button, a single dot of sensitivity somewhere up there that women either had or didn't know how to find. It's been drawn as a little nub, an afterthought in anatomy charts, barely worth a label. But that version of the clitoris is about as accurate as calling an iceberg a floating ice cube. The clitoris isn't a small button. It's a large, complex organ with deep internal structures that wrap around the vaginal canal like hidden wings, containing more than 8,000 nerve endings, twice as many as the penis. Let's start with the actual anatomy. What most people see or feel externally, the small bump above the vaginal opening, is just the glans, the tip of a much larger system. Beneath the surface lies a structure that looks almost like a wishbone or a tuning fork. Two crura, legs, extend downward and backward about 9 centimeters, wrapping around the vaginal walls. Two bulbs of the vestibule sit on either side of the vaginal entrance, swelling during arousal. All of this is clitoral tissue, erectile tissue that fills with blood just like a penis does during stimulation. When aroused, the entire organ becomes engorged, more sensitive, and slightly larger. The only reason most people still think of the clitoris as small is because early anatomists, almost all of them male, didn't bother mapping it properly. For centuries, medical illustrations omitted the organ entirely or mislabeled it as irrelevant to reproduction. It wasn't until 1998 that Australian urologist Dr. Helen O'Connell published the first MRI-based 3D model of the clitoris, revealing its full size and complexity. Yes, it took until the late 20th century for science to officially recognize what half the population had known experientially all along. Those 8,000 nerve endings don't just sit on the surface. They branch through internal pathways, connecting with surrounding tissues and pelvic nerves. That's why arousal can feel like it radiates throughout the pelvis rather than staying localized. And here's another fact that busts the tiny button myth. The clitoris is the only organ in the human body whose sole function is pleasure. It doesn't help you urinate, reproduce, or digest. It exists purely for enjoyment. The problem is that minimizing the clitoris hasn't just led to anatomical ignorance. It's shaped how society talks about female pleasure. When people are taught that it's just a button, sexual experience becomes focused on penetration, leaving the clitoris out of the equation entirely. That's why studies consistently show that only a minority of women reach orgasm through intercourse alone. For most, direct or indirect clitoral stimulation is key. And that's not dysfunction. That's anatomy doing exactly what it's built to do. Learning about the full structure of the clitoris isn't just trivia. It's empowerment. It rewrites centuries of misunderstanding, giving people permission to understand their own bodies beyond shame or guesswork. Pleasure isn't mysterious, it's simply been ignored. So no, the clitoris isn't a small button. It's a vast, intricate organ, hiding in plain sight, with internal roots that rival the complexity of any other sexual structure in the body. If the penis is a lighthouse, the clitoris is an iceberg. The real magic lies beneath the surface. Sex after childbirth ruins function permanently. It's one of the most persistent and quietly cruel myths about the body after birth, that giving birth stretches everything out permanently, that sex will never feel the same again, and that the body is somehow damaged. This belief has haunted generations of new mothers, whispered through gossip, reinforced in media, and even joked about by men who should know better. But here's the truth. Sex after childbirth doesn't ruin function permanently. The body is built to recover, to stretch, heal, and regain strength, and in most people, it does exactly that. Let's talk about what actually happens. During pregnancy, the body produces hormones like relaxin and progesterone that loosen ligaments and tissues to prepare for birth. The pelvic floor muscles, the ones supporting your bladder, uterus, and rectum, stretch significantly during delivery. That can temporarily affect tightness, sensation, and control. But temporary is the key word here. These tissues are meant to expand and then repair. Within weeks to months, muscle tone begins to return, and with gentle exercise like pelvic floor or Kegel training, most people regain full function and even better control than before. The early postpartum period can absolutely bring changes, though. Hormones fluctuate wildly, especially estrogen, which drops after delivery, sometimes causing dryness or sensitivity. The vaginal tissue can feel tender, especially if there were tears or stitches. Fatigue, stress, and sleep deprivation don't help either. So when new parents resume sex too early, physically or emotionally, discomfort is common. But that's not permanent dysfunction. It's a phase of healing. Over time, as hormone levels stabilize and the body recovers, lubrication and sensitivity usually return to normal. The ruin forever myth also ignores one crucial truth. The vagina is incredibly elastic. It's made of smooth muscle and connective tissue, designed to expand to accommodate childbirth, and then contract again. Studies using MRI and ultrasound imaging show that the vagina and pelvic floor recover substantial tone within months postpartum, especially with basic rehabilitation exercises. Even for people who have had multiple births, long-term changes in tightness or sensation are more likely to come from untreated pelvic floor weakness than from the birth itself, and that's fixable with physiotherapy. The real damage comes not from childbirth, but from silence and stigma. Many people are too embarrassed to talk about postpartum sex, and healthcare systems often fail to provide proper pelvic floor support. Women are told to just deal with it or feel broken when they notice differences, when in reality, those differences are normal, temporary, and treatable. And let's not forget the mental side. Childbirth changes how a person feels about their body, not just physically, but emotionally. Sleep deprivation, self-image, trauma, or postpartum depression can all lower libido or comfort with intimacy. Healing, in that sense, is as much physical as it is ecological. So no, sex after childbirth doesn't ruin anyone. It transforms the body for a time. Then, with patience and care, it heals. Most people return to satisfying sexual function within months. Some even report stronger orgasms or better body awareness afterward, thanks to improved pelvic control. The myth that childbirth destroys sex is less about anatomy and more about the way society treats women's bodies, as things that lose value once they perform their biological purpose. In reality, the postpartum body isn't ruined, it's resilient. It's not weaker, it's wiser. Birth doesn't end sexuality. It just asks for a little more gentleness while it reclaims its power.
You can't get STIs from same-sex activity. This myth has done real damage, both by spreading misinformation and by making people in same-sex relationships feel immune to risk. For years, sex education around the world was built almost entirely around heterosexual intercourse, penis in vagina scenarios, as if that were the only kind of sex that mattered or could transmit infection. The result? Generations grew up believing that sexually transmitted infections are a straight people problem. But that couldn't be further from the truth. STIs don't care about orientation. They spread through fluids and skin contact, not sexual identity. Let's start with the biology. STIs like herpes, HPV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, HIV, syphilis, and trichomoniasis are all transmitted through the exchange of bodily fluids, semen, vaginal fluids, or blood, or direct skin-to-skin touch with infected areas. That means oral sex, anal sex, genital touching, or even sharing sex toys can all carry risk, regardless of the genders involved. The routes of transmission depend entirely on what kind of contact happens, not who it happens with. For example, HPV, human papillomavirus, which can cause genital warts or cancers, spreads easily through skin contact and mucous membranes. It's one of the most common STIs among women who have sex with women, especially if barrier protection isn't used. Herpes simplex virus HSV1 and HSV2 spreads through kissing, oral sex, or any genital contact, even when there are no visible sores. HIV can be transmitted through blood or sexual fluids during anal or vaginal sex, and while the risk varies by act, it's present across all orientations. Gonorrhea and chlamydia can infect the throat, rectum, or genitals, depending on the kind of contact, oral, anal, or vaginal. The real problem is how rarely same-sex sexual health gets talked about. Many healthcare providers don't ask the right questions or offer inclusive testing. Some women who have sex with women skip screenings entirely because no one told them they could be at risk. Gay and bisexual men, on the other hand, often face stigma and judgment that can discourage them from seeking care. The result is a dangerous mix of misinformation and silence, which allows infections to spread more easily. Protection exists. It just has to be tailored to the act, not the identity. Dental dams for oral sex, condoms for anal or genital contact, gloves for manual play, and proper cleaning of shared sex toys all drastically reduce risk. Regular STI testing is also essential, even for monogamous couples, because many infections can stay dormant or symptomless for months. Another reason this myth persists is social discomfort. Talking openly about same-sex intimacy still feels taboo in many cultures, so safer sex education skips over it entirely. That leaves people to figure it out themselves, often relying on myths passed between peers. But the science is clear. Any sexual activity that involves fluid exchange or skin contact can transmit infections, period. And it's worth noting, having an STI doesn't mean someone was careless or dirty. It means they're human. Infections happen, and they're manageable with modern medicine. The real harm comes from stigma and misinformation, not from the viruses or bacteria themselves. So no, same-sex sex isn't safer by default.
It's just as real, just as valid, and just as capable of transmitting infections as any other kind of sex. The rules of safety and consent apply equally to everyone, because sexual health doesn't depend on who you love. It depends on how well you care for yourself and your partner. Vaginal tightness equals good health. Few myths have caused as much quiet insecurity and misunderstanding as this one. Society has long equated tightness with youth, purity, and sexual desirability, turning it into a bizarre health and performance metric. You hear it in locker room jokes, movies, and even in some medical misinformation. The idea that a tight vagina is somehow healthier, stronger, or more pleasurable. But here's the truth. Tightness isn't a sign of good health. It can actually signal pain, tension, or pelvic floor dysfunction. Let's break down what tight means really. The vagina isn't a fixed-size tube. It's a muscular, elastic canal made to expand, contract, and adapt during arousal, childbirth, and even simple daily movements. When relaxed, the vaginal walls gently touch each other. But during arousal, blood flow increases and the muscles loosen to allow penetration. That natural flexibility is a feature, not a flaw. A tight feeling outside of arousal often means the pelvic floor muscles, the sling of muscles that support the bladder, uterus, and rectum, are overly tense. Think of them like a clenched fist. It's not strength, it's stress. This tension can come from a variety of causes: anxiety, trauma, childbirth, chronic pain, or even too much focus on staying tight. Many people unknowingly hold tension in their pelvic muscles the way others hold it in their shoulders. Over time, that can lead to painful conditions like vaginismus, where the muscles involuntarily spasm, making penetration difficult or impossible, or dyspareunia, pain during sex. These are medical issues, not personality traits, and they're far more common than most realize. So where did the tight equals healthy myth come from? Like many myths about women's bodies, it's rooted in patriarchy and misunderstanding. For centuries, cultures used virginity as a measure of value, and tightness became the supposed physical proof of sexual inexperience, which is medically nonsense. The hymen doesn't break, and the vagina doesn't loosen with sex. It simply adapts to arousal and activity. The idea that a person's worth or health could be read by their anatomy is an ancient, sexist holdover that science has thoroughly debunked. What actually signals good vaginal and pelvic health is balance, muscles that can contract and relax when needed. Just like you wouldn't want a bicep that's always flexed, you don't want a pelvic floor that's always clenched. Healthy function means flexibility, coordination, and comfort, not constant tension. If someone experiences persistent tightness or pain during penetration, that's not a sign of strength. It's a signal from the body saying something needs attention. Pelvic floor physical therapy, relaxation techniques, and sometimes counseling can make a world of difference. These therapies focus on retraining the muscles to release, improving blood flow, and restoring confidence and comfort. And here's the other truth that rarely gets said out loud. Tight doesn't automatically mean pleasurable for either partner. Pleasure comes from communication, arousal,
and comfort. When someone's tense or anxious, the body resists, making sex painful or numb. Relaxation, not restriction, is what allows intimacy to feel good. So no, vaginal tightness isn't a badge of health, youth, or virtue. It's just one state of a system designed to move, adapt, and respond. Real health means flexibility, comfort, and the ability to feel, not constriction. A healthy vagina isn't one that stays tight. It's one that responds to your body, your emotions, and your needs, exactly as nature intended. Male fertility isn't affected by lifestyle. For a long time, fertility conversations have focused almost entirely on women, their age, hormones, cycles, and choices, while men were treated like passive contributors, as if their fertility were bulletproof. You'll still hear people say things like, men can have kids at any age, or sperm doesn't really change, but that's a myth. Male fertility is deeply affected by lifestyle, environment, and daily habits, sometimes even more than people realize. Here's what science actually says. Sperm production is a delicate process, and it depends on the health of the entire body. The testicles need specific conditions to function properly, especially temperature, hormone balance, and cell health. Small lifestyle choices can quietly sabotage all three. Let's start with heat. Testicles hang outside the body for a reason. Sperm cells develop best a few degrees cooler than internal body temperature. When they overheat, from tight underwear, prolonged laptop use on the lap, hot tubs, or even hours of sitting, sperm count and motility can drop. Studies have shown that frequent exposure to heat can reduce sperm concentration by as much as 40%, though the effect is reversible once conditions change. Then there's alcohol, smoking, and drugs. Excessive drinking lowers testosterone and damages the cells that produce sperm. Nicotine and cannabis have been linked to decreased motility, how well sperm swim, and increased DNA fragmentation, meaning even if sperm are produced, they may be less viable. Heavy alcohol use can also cause oxidative stress, where free radicals attack healthy sperm cells, reducing their lifespan and quality. But the sneakiest culprit might be something most people never think about: plastics. Everyday products like water bottles, food containers, and canned linings often contain chemicals such as BPA, bisphenol A, and phthalates. These are endocrine disruptors, compounds that mimic hormones and interfere with the body's natural signals. Research has repeatedly shown that exposure to BPA and phthalates can lower sperm count, decrease motility, and even alter sperm shape. Some scientists have linked widespread fertility decline over the last 50 years partly to the rise of these environmental chemicals. Diet also plays a major role. Diets high in processed foods, trans fats, and sugar are associated with poorer sperm quality, while diets rich in fruits, vegetables, and omega-3s support healthy sperm development. Micronutrients like zinc, selenium, and vitamin C all contribute to sperm production and DNA stability. Exercise helps too, up to a point. Moderate, regular activity boosts testosterone and blood flow, but excessive endurance training, especially combined with restrictive diets or steroids, can actually suppress reproductive hormones. And let's not forget stress and sleep. Chronic stress increases cortisol, which interferes with testosterone production. Poor sleep disrupts hormonal cycles and reduces sperm concentration. It's all interconnected. Fertility isn't a separate system, it's a reflection of overall health. Age does matter too. While men can remain fertile for longer than women, sperm quality still declines with time. Studies show that after age 40, sperm motility, morphology, shape, and DNA integrity all begin to drop, which can increase the risk of miscarriage or developmental issues. So no, male fertility doesn't stay constant forever. The takeaway is simple, but often overlooked. Sperm health isn't luck, it's maintenance. The body needs the right environment to make strong, healthy cells. And modern life doesn't always make that easy. But the good news is that sperm regenerate every 70 to 90 days, meaning lifestyle changes can make a measurable difference in just a few months. So no, male fertility isn't immune to lifestyle. It's shaped by it, by heat, diet, habits, and environment. The myth of the indestructible sperm isn't just wrong, it's outdated. Fertility isn't just a women's issue, it's a team effort. And half that team needs to start reading the same playbook.
Condoms reduce pleasure drastically. It's one of the oldest excuses in the book. It just doesn't feel the same with a condom. You'll hear it from people trying to dodge safe sex, comedians making lazy jokes, or even in pop culture scenes that treat condoms like instant passion killers. But this idea that condoms ruin sex or kill sensation? That's a myth, and science has called it out repeatedly. When the right fit, material, and texture are used, the difference in pleasure is so small that most people can't even tell. Let's start with what the research says. In controlled studies published in journals like the Journal of Sexual Medicine and Archives of Sexual Behavior, both men and women were asked to rate their pleasure during condom and non-condom sex. The results? On average, there was no significant difference in enjoyment or satisfaction. In fact, some participants reported more pleasure with condoms, often because they felt less anxious about pregnancy or STIs. When people feel safe, they relax. And when they relax, sex feels better. So why does the myth persist? Partly because of bad experiences with poorly fitting or low-quality condoms. The one-size-fits-all approach is misleading. Condoms vary in size and thickness, material, and lubrication. Using one that's too tight can cause pressure or loss of sensation. Too loose, and it can slip or bunch up. But with the right fit, most men report no measurable loss of feeling. It's like wearing a thin, well-fitted glove versus a thick winter mitten. The difference isn't the concept, it's the quality and fit. Then there's the mental side. A lot of what people perceive as less pleasure is actually psychological, not physical. If someone expects a condom to dull sensation, their brain primes them to notice it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the flip side, when people use condoms that feel right, thin, lubricated, and designed for sensation, they often report no loss at all. Some newer condoms are made from materials like polyisoprene or polyurethane, which transmit heat and texture better than traditional latex. There are even ultra-thin options that are nearly indistinguishable from skin-to-skin contact. Another overlooked factor is communication. When partners take the time to explore, apply, and experiment with condoms together, it becomes part of the experience instead of an interruption. Adding lube, which is always a good idea, even with pre-lubed condoms, dramatically improves comfort and sensation. And contrary to another myth, condoms don't always make sex last shorter. Some men actually find they help with stamina. reducing overstimulation without reducing enjoyment. But let's address the social angle too. The condoms kill the mood line is often used as a manipulation tactic. It frames safety as selfishness, as if pleasure and protection can't coexist. That mindset comes from immaturity, not biology. True confidence in bed comes from respect for yourself and your partner. The truth is, condoms protect against pregnancy and STIs without destroying pleasure, and they give both partners peace of mind that makes intimacy freer, not colder. If anything, they remove the background fear that kills desire faster than latex ever could. So no, condoms don't ruin sex. Bad fit, cheap brands, and bad attitudes do. When you find the right one, the right size, texture, and vibe, you'll realize pleasure isn't about friction alone. It's about freedom, comfort, and trust. And nothing feels better than that. Women don't enjoy casual sex. For generations, society has clung to this idea that women are naturally less interested in casual sex, that hookups are a male pursuit, while women only want emotional connection. It's been repeated in movies, advice columns, and even outdated psychology studies as if it's hardwired into evolution. But here's the truth. Women enjoy casual sex just as much as men do, when the social and emotional conditions allow it. The difference isn't biology. It's culture, stigma, and safety. Let's unpack that. The myth largely comes from 20th century research, famously studies where men and women were asked if they'd go home with a stranger for sex. Almost all men said yes, and almost all women said no. That became the proof that men are wired for quantity and women for quality. But what those early studies ignored were context and consequences. Women face far higher risks in casual encounters: pregnancy, STIs, violence, social judgment. And historically, they've had far less control over those outcomes. When you factor those in, the so-called natural difference in desire starts to vanish. Modern research paints a very different picture. When women feel safe, respected, and free from stigma, their reported enjoyment of casual sex is nearly identical to men's. Studies show that women who initiate hookups, choose their partners, or experience mutual pleasure are just as likely to rate those encounters positively. In contrast, when sex happens under pressure, poor communication, or social shame, satisfaction drops, not because women don't like casual sex, but because it's been framed as something they're not supposed to like. This is where the cultural double standard comes in. Men are often praised for casual sex, players, studs, legends. Women, meanwhile, risk being labeled easy or unladylike. That social penalty changes how women report or even remember their experiences. Psychologists call this the sexual double standard effect. Women underreport their sexual activity or enjoyment when they think they're being judged. But when surveys are anonymous or conducted with privacy, the gender gap in desire and satisfaction nearly disappears. And then there's the anatomy factor that often gets overlooked. Physical pleasure depends on the quality of the encounter, not the label. Many casual experiences historically failed to prioritize women's pleasure, especially when partners lacked communication or foreplay. Unsurprisingly, that leads to lower satisfaction.
But when casual sex is consensual, communicative, and focused on mutual pleasure, women's enjoyment rates spike dramatically. It's not the casualness that matters, it's the equality. Even evolutionary psychology, which was once used to defend the myth, has evolved. Newer studies show that both men and women have flexible mating strategies. Women aren't biologically programmed to avoid short-term sex. They're programmed to weigh cost and context. When risks are low and autonomy is high, interest rises. It's survival logic, not prudishness. What's really going on is social conditioning. Women are taught to guard reputation. Men are taught to chase validation. Those scripts shape behavior more than any hormone ever could. But as those norms loosen, with safer contraception, better consent culture, and less stigma, women's sexual expression starts to look a lot more like men's. So no, women aren't less suited for casual sex. They've just been punished more harshly for enjoying it. Take away the fear, judgment, and double standards, and human desire looks strikingly genderless, curious, complex, and free.
Period sex is unhealthy. For centuries, menstruation has been treated like something dirty, taboo, or even dangerous, and that stigma has spread into how people think about sex during a period. Many cultures still discourage it, claiming it's unhygienic, risky, or unnatural. Even today, people cringe at the idea, imagining it as messy or unsanitary. But here's the truth. Period sex is perfectly safe, and for some people, it's even beneficial. Let's start with the medical facts. Menstrual blood isn't toxic or full of waste. It's simply a mix of blood, tissue, and fluids that the body naturally sheds each month. The vagina cleanses itself during this process. It's one of the most self-maintaining systems in the body. Having sex during a period doesn't contaminate anything. The vagina isn't an open wound, and it doesn't absorb harmful bacteria during intercourse any more than it does at other times in the cycle. As long as both partners practice safe sex and are comfortable, there's no health reason to avoid it. In fact, period sex can actually relieve discomfort. During orgasm, the body releases endorphins, natural painkillers that reduce cramps and lift mood. The muscle contractions that come with climax also help the uterus shed its lining more efficiently, which can shorten the length of the period for some people. Increased blood flow to the pelvic region can relieve tension, while intimacy and oxytocin, the bonding hormone, can counter mood swings and irritability. What's often painted as gross is actually one of the body's cleverest built-in relief systems. Of course, there are still some considerations. The risk of STIs can be slightly higher during menstruation because the cervix is more open and blood can carry viruses like HIV or hepatitis. Using protection, condoms, dental dams, etc., minimizes that risk. Pregnancy is also less likely during menstruation, but not impossible. Sperm can survive up to 5 days inside the body, so if someone ovulates early, conception can still occur. So period sex as birth control is not a safe bet. Culturally, much of the fear around period sex comes from long-standing taboos.
Ancient texts and religious traditions often labeled menstruation as impure, not because of science, but because people didn't understand biology. In reality, menstruation is a normal, healthy process, not a disease. The stigma that came with it has done far more harm than the act itself ever could. It's made people feel ashamed of their bodies, uncomfortable discussing natural functions, and guilty about intimacy. Some people still prefer to skip sex during their period, and that's totally valid. Comfort and consent matter more than any scientific argument. But if both partners are open to it, a few simple adjustments, like laying down a towel or focusing on positions that feel comfortable, make it no big deal. In fact, many couples find that period sex feels more intimate, relaxed, and emotionally close because it strips away the illusion that sex has to be perfect or pristine. The bottom line is that period sex isn't dirty, dangerous, or unhealthy. It's a normal, safe option for those who feel comfortable with it, and in many cases it can ease cramps, boost mood, and strengthen connection. The only real thing that needs cleaning up isn't the act itself, it's the centuries of stigma that made people feel ashamed of something so natural.
Vasectomy lowers testosterone. For a lot of men, the word vasectomy still carries a shadow of fear. Whispered rumors about lost manhood, diminished libido, or hormonal collapse. You'll hear people say things like, "It'll make you less of a man," or "You'll lose your drive." These anxieties are so common that many men avoid the procedure entirely, even when they don't want more children. But here's the truth. A vasectomy doesn't lower testosterone, reduce sex drive, or affect masculinity in any way. All it does is block sperm from leaving the body. That's it. Let's unpack how it actually works. During a vasectomy, a doctor cuts or seals the vas deferens, the two tiny tubes that carry sperm from the testicles to the urethra. The testicles keep right on producing sperm after the procedure. Those sperm just never make it out. They're harmlessly reabsorbed by the body, just like they would be if someone abstained from sex. The testosterone-producing cells, Leydig cells, inside the testicles stay completely untouched. They keep pumping out hormones exactly as before, releasing testosterone into the bloodstream as usual. And that's the key point. A vasectomy only affects the plumbing, not the factory. It doesn't touch the parts of the body responsible for hormone production, erection, ejaculation, or orgasm. In fact, most men notice almost no difference in the look, feel, or function of their semen after recovery. The only thing missing is sperm, which make up less than 5% of ejaculate volume anyway. Everything else, fluid from the prostate and seminal vesicles, stays the same. Clinical studies back this up again and again. Blood tests before and after vasectomy show no significant changes in testosterone, sex drive, erection strength, or mood. A 2017 review of medical data even found that men who underwent the vasectomy often reported higher sexual satisfaction afterward, likely because they felt more relaxed and spontaneous without worrying about unintended pregnancy. The myth of hormonal loss is just that, a myth born from misunderstanding. So why does the myth persist? Two reasons: history and ego. For centuries, society has linked male virility to fertility.
as if being able to father a child defines masculinity. When vasectomy became common in the 20th century, some men equated it with castration, confusing sterilization, which affects fertility, with emasculation, which affects hormones. In reality, they're completely different. A vasectomy leaves the testicles fully intact. Castration removes them. The difference couldn't be more dramatic. There's also a psychological component. Because testosterone is tied to identity, strength, energy, desire, men often fear that anything involving their reproductive system might mess with that balance. But in truth, a vasectomy doesn't touch those systems. Testosterone levels remain stable. Erections work normally, and orgasm feels the same. The only change is reproductive capability, not sexual capacity. Even better, a vasectomy is one of the most reliable, low-risk forms of birth control available, with effectiveness rates above 99%. It's quick, safe, and reversible in many cases. And yet, the stigma keeps it underused, all because people mistake reproductive function for hormonal strength. So no, a vasectomy doesn't drain your testosterone, your libido, or your masculinity. It simply gives you control. The hormones that fuel desire, mood, and vitality don't even notice the change. If anything, the only thing a vasectomy might lower is your stress about surprise parenthood. Everything else, your hormones, your sex life, and your confidence, stays exactly where it belongs. You can't contract HIV from oral sex. This myth has floated around for decades. The comforting idea that oral sex is safe sex by default. You'll hear people say, "It's fine, you can't get HIV that way," as if mouths were magically immune to infection. And while it's true that the risk of HIV transmission through oral sex is much lower than through anal or vaginal intercourse, it's not zero. HIV can be transmitted through oral sex under certain conditions, and pretending otherwise puts people at unnecessary risk. Here's what's actually happening. HIV spreads when virus-containing fluids, like blood, semen, vaginal fluids, or rectal secretions, come into direct contact with mucous membranes or broken skin. The mouth, though generally tougher than genital tissue, still contains those same vulnerable membranes. Tiny cuts, sores, inflamed gums, or even recent dental work can provide entry points for the virus. So while the risk is small, it's not impossible. Statistically, oral sex accounts for a very small percentage of new HIV infections worldwide, but documented cases do exist. Transmission is more likely when the HIV-positive partner has a high viral load, meaning the virus is active and uncontrolled. There are open sores, ulcers, or bleeding gums in the mouth. Ejaculation occurs directly into the mouth. The oral partner has other STIs which can make tissue more vulnerable. That said, there are also strong reasons why oral transmission is rare. Saliva contains enzymes and antibodies that make it a hostile environment for HIV, and the virus doesn't survive well outside the body. The average mouth also doesn't provide this sustained contact that vaginal or anal tissue does. These factors make the probability of infection low, but low isn't the same as impossible. And this is where the myth becomes dangerous. When people assume oral sex carries zero risk, they're less likely to take precautions or get tested. That mindset also contributes to the spread of other STIs like herpes, gonorrhea, HPV, syphilis, and chlamydia, all of which transmit easily through oral contact. HIV might be harder to contract this way, but those infections can spread through saliva or mucus exchange and go unnoticed for months. The good news? There are simple, effective ways to make oral sex even safer. Avoid contact if there are open sores or bleeding in the mouth or genitals. Use condoms or dental dams for protection during oral sex. Don't brush or floss right before or after, since that can cause micro tears in the gums. Get tested regularly. And if either partner is HIV positive, maintaining undetectable viral load through treatment makes transmission virtually impossible. The persistence of this myth also reveals something about how we talk about sex. For decades, sexual education focused almost exclusively on heterosexual intercourse, leaving oral sex, and especially queer sexual health, under-discussed. That gap in information made it easy for misinformation to spread. People assumed low risk meant no risk, and the result was unnecessary complacency. So no, you can't call oral sex HIV-proof. The risk is small, but it's real. And pretending otherwise undermines the very thing that makes modern sexual health empowering: informed choice. Knowledge doesn't kill the mood. It keeps people safe enough to enjoy intimacy without fear. The goal isn't paranoia, it's realism. The mouth isn't magic, it's just biology, and biology always deserves respect. Men can't have multiple orgasms. It's one of those facts that almost everyone accepts without question. Women can have multiple orgasms, men can't. The cultural script is so deeply ingrained that people treat it like biology's final rule. Men finish once, then need a recovery period. End of story. But modern sex research and thousands of lived experiences tell a different story. Men can have multiple orgasms. The difference lies not in anatomy, but in awareness and control. Let's start with what actually happens during male orgasm. In most men, orgasm and ejaculation happen so close together they feel like one event: a sharp, pleasurable contraction followed by release. Afterward, there's a refractory period, a recovery phase where arousal drops and it becomes difficult or impossible to get another erection for a while. This downtime can last minutes for some and hours for others, and it's often treated as inevitable. But the truth is, the orgasm and ejaculation are separate processes. They just usually occur simultaneously. Orgasm is a neurological event, a wave of muscle contractions and endorphin release triggered by stimulation and tension release. Ejaculation, on the other hand, is a physical reflex involving the expulsion of semen from the body. They usually fire together, but they don't have to. With practice and awareness, men can learn to experience the muscular and neurological sensations of orgasm without triggering ejaculation. When that happens, there's no major hormone crash, no loss of energy, and no refractory period, allowing another orgasm to build soon after. This isn't a new discovery either. Eastern sexual traditions, particularly in Taoist and Tantric practices, have been teaching men to separate orgasm from ejaculation for centuries. Modern science has since confirmed it's physiologically possible. By training pelvic floor muscles, especially through exercises like Kegels and practicing arousal control, some men can interrupt the reflex that leads to ejaculation while still allowing the pleasure wave of orgasm to flow. Over time, this can lead to multiple dry orgasms, intense, full-body climaxes that don't result in ejaculation. Of course, this isn't about superhuman ability or spiritual enlightenment. It's about understanding the body better. Most men have never been taught that this separation exists, much less how to control it. Society frames male pleasure as linear: arousal, then climax, then sleep. That mindset alone limits what men think they're capable of. It's also worth noting that not every man will achieve this easily, and that's okay. Everyone's physiology is a bit different, and multiple orgasms take patience, body awareness, and a lot of practice. They often involve slowing down, focusing on breathing, and shifting attention from genital sensation to full-body pleasure, something modern, performance-focused sex rarely encourages. And for those wondering if this is just a myth in reverse, no, it's been documented. Research published in the Journal of Sex Research and Sexual and Relationship Therapy has reported cases of men experiencing multiple non-ejaculatory orgasms verified through physiological monitoring. They're rare but real. The larger takeaway is this: male sexuality is far more adaptable and nuanced than most men are taught. The idea that orgasm equals ejaculation is a learned limitation, not a biological law. So no, men aren't built for one and done. They're just taught that they are. With a bit of patience, mindfulness, and control, the male body can experience pleasure on repeat, not because it's extraordinary, but because it's been capable of it all along.